They kidnapped my son thinking they could break me, but they forgot I'm the man who makes monsters beg for mercy. That's how it began, when a corrupt HOA crossed a line no one should ever cross. Fake HOA tried to kidnap my son, didn't know Dad's a lethal Marine sniper. Welcome to HOA Karen Files, where we expose the clipboard tyrants and power-hungry vultures who think they can rule your life with fines and fake smiles. I'm here to tell you the story of Colonel Ethan Caldwell, a Special Forces legend who turned a suburban nightmare into a battlefield, taking down a criminal empire to save his boy. This isn't just a tale of vengeance. It's a warning to every HOA Karen out there. Mess with the wrong family and you'll face a reckoning. If you're fed up with overreaching HOAs, smash that subscribe button, hit the bell, and join our fight at HOA Karen Files. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what's the worst HOA horror you've faced? Let's dive into Pine Hollow, where a Marine showed the world what happens when you threaten what's his. I am Colonel Ethan Caldwell, forged in the fires of war, tempered by 20 years of hunting the world's deadliest threats through deserts, mountains, and cities that smelled of blood and betrayal. Special Forces, Green Beret, a man who stared into the abyss and made it blink. When I hung up my uniform, I thought I'd traded chaos for peace, moving my son, Liam, to the polished streets of Pine Hollow. A sanctuary, they called it. Manicured lawns, gleaming houses, neighbors with smiles as crisp as their pressed shirts. I chose this place for Liam, my 10-year-old rock, to give him a life free from the shadows of my past. I was wrong, dead wrong. Beneath the surface of Pine Hollow, a predator lurked, cloaked in suits and clipboards, wielding rules like weapons. They thought they could break me. They didn't know they'd picked a fight with a man who'd never lost a mission, and never would. Pine Hollow was a lie wrapped in a postcard, rows of colonial-style homes, each with shutters aligned like soldiers on parade, white picket fences that screamed stability, a community pool where kids splashed under the watchful eyes of parents sipping overpriced coffee. It was the kind of place you'd see in a real estate ad, promising safety, status, and a slice of the American dream. After losing my wife, Sarah, to a cancer that tore through her faster than a bullet, I needed this. Liam needed this. He'd been 6 when she slipped away, his small hand clutching hers as the monitors flatlined. I'd promised her I'd keep him safe, give him a home where grief couldn't follow. Pine Hollow seemed like the answer. A fortress for my boy to grow, laugh, and leave behind the weight of loss. But fortresses can be sieges in disguise, and Pine Hollow was no exception. The first crack in the facade came the day we arrived. A moving truck rumbled behind us as Liam and I stepped out of my old Jeep, its dense a map of missions I'd never talk about. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and money. Neighbors glanced from their porches, their eyes lingering a beat too long, not curious, but calculating. Liam, his backpack slung over one shoulder, squinted at the house. "It's big, Dad. Too big for just us." His voice carried that quiet wisdom he'd inherited from Sarah, the kind that saw through surfaces. I ruffled his hair. "We'll make it ours, kid. You'll see." But even as I said it, a prickle ran down my spine, the same instinct that had kept me alive in Kandahar when an ambush was seconds away. The welcome packet was waiting on the doorstep, a glossy folder stamped with the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association logo, a stylized tree that looked more like a claw. Inside were rules thicker than a field manual. Grass height not to exceed 2 inches. Mailboxes limited to 3 approved colors. No outdoor decorations without prior approval. I'd seen less bureaucracy in military bases under lockdown. Liam flipped through it, frowning. "They care about our trash cans more than we do." I chuckled, but the weight of those pages settled in my gut. Control like that wasn't about order. It was about power. The HOA orientation meeting was mandatory, set for Saturday morning in the community center, a glass and steel monstrosity that screamed new money. Liam stayed home with a neighbor's kid, playing video games, while I walked into a room that felt like a courtroom. Rows of folding chairs, a podium up front, and a dozen residents who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. At the helm was Cassandra Wells, the HOA president, A woman in her late 40s with a smile sharp enough to cut steel. Her tailored blazer and pearl earrings were armor, her clipboard a weapon. She moved like a predator, all grace and menace, her eyes locking onto me the moment I entered. "Colonel Caldwell," she said, her voice smooth as a sniper's trigger pull. "We're so pleased to have you in Pine Hollow." She extended a manicured hand, but her grip was too tight, her gaze too hungry. I'd faced warlords who hid their intent better. "Just Ethan now," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Retired." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes flickered like she was filing that away. "Retired, yet so young. What do you do to keep busy, Ethan? Single father, new to the area. It must be quite the adjustment." I mentioned my work as a security consultant, leaving out the decades of tracking high-value targets through hostile terrain. Her questions came fast, each one a probe. My income, my travel schedule, Liam's school hours. She wasn't making small talk. She was building a dossier. "It's just you and your son, correct?" she pressed, flipping through her clipboard. "No other family nearby?" The room was silent, the other residents watching like cowed recruits. I nodded, my jaw tight. "Just us." Her smile widened, a shark smelling blood. Liam's reaction when I got home confirmed my unease. "Dad, that lady from the HOA stopped by while you were gone. Asked if you work late a lot. I didn't tell her anything." His eyes were sharp, wary. At 10, he already had a soldier's instincts. "Good call, kid," I said, pulling him into a quick hug. "You don't owe her answers." But the prickle in my spine was now a full-blown alarm. Cassandra Wells wasn't just nosy. She was hunting. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, the house too quiet, the shadows too deep. Sarah's photo on the mantel watched me, her smile a reminder of the promise I'd made. I'd failed her once, letting the cancer win. I wouldn't fail Liam. Outside, the street was still, but I felt eyes on us. Not paranoia, instinct, honed by years of knowing when I was being watched. I checked the windows, the locks, the corners of the property. Everything was secure, but secure didn't mean safe. Not here. The next morning I found the note. Tucked in our mailbox, a crumpled scrap of paper with 5 words scrawled in black ink. "Get out now. You're marked." Below it, a single word. Sentinel. My blood ran cold. Sentinel was my old unit's call sign, known only to a handful of men I'd bled with in places the world forgot. Someone knew who I was, not just the retired colonel, but the hunter who dismantled terrorist cells and walked away from explosions without looking back. This wasn't a prank. It was a warning. I burned the note in the backyard, the flames licking the paper as Liam slept upstairs. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments. Cassandra's questions, the HOA's rules, the neighbors' glances. Pine Hollow wasn't a community, it was a trap, and we'd walked right into it. I'd faced enemies before, but they wore fatigues or hid in caves. These wore suits and smiled at block parties. They thought they could scare me. They thought wrong. I was a soldier, a father, a man who'd carved his name into the bones of those who crossed him. Pine Hollow was about to learn what happens when you threaten a Marine's family. Nguyen Han. The enemy revealed itself slowly, like a snake uncoiling in the grass. Pine Hollow's perfection was a mask, and I was trained to see through masks. Cassandra Wells and her HOA weren't just petty bureaucrats. They were predators, running a machine built on fear and greed. They thought they could crush us, bleed us dry, and spit us out. They didn't know I'd spent my life breaking machines bigger than theirs, and I wasn't about to let them touch my son. The first week was a study in deception. Neighbors waved, but their eyes darted away when I met their gaze. Mail arrived daily, bills for HOA fees that rivaled my mortgage, notices about violations I hadn't committed. One cited a non-compliant mailbox color, demanding $500 to replace it with an approved shade of slate gray. Another fined me $1,000 for a lawn that was a quarter-inch too long. I'd seen less aggressive shakedowns in war zones. Liam noticed it too. "Dad, why do they care about our grass? It's just grass." I didn't have an answer, not yet. But I knew this wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control. I started digging, the way I used to when tracking a target through hostile territory. Public records were my first stop, accessed from a secure laptop in my home office. A room I'd already swept for bugs. Old habits die hard. What I found made my skin crawl. Pine Hollow had seen 12 homes sold in the past year, all at prices so low they screamed fraud. The sellers were predictable. Elderly widows, single parents, retirees on fixed incomes, vulnerable. The buyers? Shell companies with names like Evergreen Holdings and Prospect Ventures, all tied to offshore accounts. Each property was flipped within months, netting millions. This wasn't a neighborhood. It was a slaughterhouse. I knocked on Margaret Lane's door, 2 houses down. She was 72, a widow whose husband had built their home with his own hands. Her front yard was a riot of roses, defiant against the HOA's sterile rules. When she opened the door, her hands trembled, her eyes hollow. "Colonel Caldwell," she said, glancing over my shoulder. "What do you want?" I kept my voice low, steady. "I'm trying to understand this place, Margaret. The fines, the rules, what's going on?" She hesitated, then ushered me inside, locking the door behind us. Over weak tea, she spilled the truth. The HOA was a racket. Fines came without warning, each one steeper than the last. $2,000 for a cracked driveway, $500 for unapproved flower beds. When she couldn't pay, Cassandra offered to buy her house, at half its value. "They want me out," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This was our home, mine and Tom's, 40 years. Now they're saying my roses are a visual nuisance. Fined me $3,000 last week." Her hands clutched the teacup like a lifeline. "I can't fight them, Ethan. I'm tired." I listened, my jaw tight, my mind mapping the enemy's tactics. Identify the weak, apply pressure, break them. It was a playbook I'd seen in insurgent campaigns. Only this time, the battlefield was a suburban street. "You're not alone, Margaret," I said. "I'll find a way." She shook her head, fear etched into every line of her face. "Be careful. They're not just bullies. They're dangerous." Dangerous didn't scare me. I'd walk through minefields with less caution than most people cross the street. But the note from Sentinel gnawed at me. Whoever sent it knew my past, my unit, my methods. I spent nights combing through old mission logs, cross-referencing names from my days in the field. No matches. Whoever they were a ghost, and ghosts don't warn you unless the threat is real. The next red flag came from Liam. He joined a kids club run by the HOA, a supposed leadership program. I let him go, but only after fitting him with a tracker, a watch with a hidden GPS, a relic from my ops days. "If anything feels off, press it twice," I told him. He nodded, his face serious. "Like our camping games, right? Run, yell, tell." I smiled, proud. "Exactly, kid." But when he came home, his words hit like a gut punch. "Mrs. Wells asked about your work, Dad. When you're gone, where you go. She said it's for a neighborhood safety plan." I didn't say anything. My blood turned to ice. Using my son as a spy? That was a line you don. Ascending to the top of a church tower, a sniper's bullet would be kinder. I pulled him into a quick hug, my voice low. "You did right, Liam. You always tell me everything, understand?" He nodded, but I saw the worry in his eyes. He was 10, not blind. He knew something was wrong. I installed cameras around the house that night, hidden in shrubs and eaves, feeding to a secure server. Old habits. I taught Liam basic evasion tactics, disguised as games. "If someone you don't know tries to grab you, what do?" I asked, tossing a football in the yard. He grinned, shouting, "Run! Yell! Tell!" I laughed, but my chest tightened. I was training my son to survive in a place that was supposed to be safe. The cameras caught the next move. At 2 a.m., a man crept through my yard, moving like he'd done it before. Broad shoulders, buzz cut, a face that looked carved from granite. He lingered by Liam's window, snapping photos with a phone. I zoomed in on the footage, my heart pounding. In his hand was a folder, thick, labeled Caldwell Assessment. This wasn't about fines or property. They were targeting my son. I recognized the pattern instantly. Build a profile, find the pressure point, leverage it. Classic interrogation tactics, only this time the target was a 10-year-old boy. My boy. Rage burned in my veins, but I kept it locked down. Anger without focus is a death sentence. I needed intel, not revenge. Not yet. I reached out to Detective Javier Alvarez, a cop I'd met during a consulting gig. Mid-30s, sharp eyes, a handshake that said he wasn't bought. We met at a diner 3 towns over, no chances taken. Pine Hollow's been on my radar, he admitted, stirring his coffee. Complaints about the HOA, but nothing sticks. Witnesses vanish. Reports get lost. These people are ghosts. I shared what I knew. Fines, forced sales, the kids' club. I kept the note and my past to myself. Trust is earned even with cops. Alvarez leaned forward, voice low. I've got a contact in state police. Someone clean. Get me hard evidence and I'll make sure it hits the right desks. But Ethan, watch your back. These people don't play nice. I nodded, my mind already planning. Evidence. That's what I needed. Something so damning even a corrupt system couldn't bury it. The HOA called an emergency meeting the next day. Cassandra stood at the podium, her voice dripping with authority. New rules. No outdoor lighting without approval. All fences must be cedar, not pine. A community enhancement fee of $750 a month. The residents sat silent, heads bowed like prisoners. When I stood to object, Cassandra's eyes locked on mine. Mr. Caldwell, as a new resident, perhaps you should learn our ways before challenging them. The threat was clear, her smile ablaze. After the meeting, a man approached me in the parking lot. George Tanner, 65, retired mechanic, hands calloused from a lifetime of work. They got my sister last year, he said quietly. Single mom, 2 kids. Fined her $15,000 for structural issues. She sold for pennies. They're vultures, Colonel, and they know your trouble. He glanced around nervous. They've got eyes everywhere. Cops, City Hall, be smart. That night, I cross-checked Tanner's story. His sister's house sold for $200,000 below market, bought by a company linked to Cassandra's brother. The pattern was airtight. This wasn't random. It was a campaign, surgical, relentless. They were dismantling lives, and now they'd set their sights on us. The final straw came when Liam's tracker pinged at 3 a.m., miles from home. He'd been at the HOA's leadership camp, a weekend event I'd reluctantly allowed, thinking I could monitor him. The signal led to an industrial park, a cluster of abandoned factories on the edge of town. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Sign over your house, half value, no cops, or the kid pays. They'd made their move, amateurs. They thought they could scare me, break me, own me. They didn't know who they were dealing with. I was a hunter, a soldier, a father who'd burned the world to ash before letting anyone touch my son. I grabbed my gear, burner phone, knife, the fake deed I'd prepared, and headed out. The game was on, and I played to win. Duay jay la fanchao traukwa kao chuyin, the iron stand a soldier's fight for family. Juocha viet, boyjo dai kong 3,400 gyugyongwan manme, jantep, the hien ki chatkwa mot ngoy kwan han. Fan nai juak thiet ke jefu, hop voy toy long audio, huang 40 foot kiket hop. Voy kas fan truk, jong toy jambao noi dung nguyen ben, tuan tu luat fair use. Toy tiep tuk su dung artifact it kwa kao chu entrok je dui triting nat kwan. The Iron Stand, a soldier's fight for family. Cao Trao, the night was a blade, sharp and cold, cutting through the silence of the industrial park. My Jeep idled a block away, engine off, lights dark. The tracker's signal pulsed on my phone. A steady heartbeat from Liam, my son, my mission. He was inside a rotting factory, surrounded by Cassandra Wells and her pack of jackals. They thought they held the cards, thought they could break a man like me with a single text. Sign over your house? Half value, no cops, or the kid pays. Fools. They didn't know they just lit the fuse on a Marine who'd walk through hell and come out swinging. I was Colonel Ethan Caldwell, Special Forces, And tonight, I wasn't just a father. I was a hunter, and my prey was about to learn what happens when you corner a man who never backs down. The factory loomed ahead, a skeleton of rusted steel and broken glass, its silhouette jagged against the moonless sky. I moved on foot, silent, my boots barely kissing the gravel. Every sense was razor sharp, honed by years of stalking targets through deserts and slums where a single misstep meant death. The air stank of oil and decay, but beneath it I caught the faint tang of cigarette smoke. Someone was careless. I cataloged the terrain. 2 main exits, a loading dock on the east side, high windows too grimy to see through clearly. Security cameras hung limp, wires dangling like severed arteries. Amateurs. They relied on fear, not skill, and that was their first mistake. I crouched behind a stack of rotting pallets, my burner phone pressed to my ear, its recorder active. The device was a holdover from my ops days, small enough to hide in a seam of my jacket. Evidence was my weapon tonight, as lethal as any blade. I dialed the number from the text. Cassandra answered on the second ring, her voice slick with false concern. "Mr. Caldwell, so glad you called. Your boy's safe, for now." Such a brave little soldier. It'd be a shame if he learned what happens to families who defy us. I let my voice crack, playing the part of a desperate dad. "Don't hurt him. Please. I'll do whatever you want." Inside, rage burned white hot, but I kept it chained. Focus was my edge. "Why Liam? Why us?" I asked, feeding her ego, knowing predators like her couldn't resist gloating. She laughed, a sound like glass shattering. "Oh, Ethan, you're smarter than that. Pine Hollow's a gold mine. Your corner lot? 2 million once we rezone it for commercial. Your military pension, that fat insurance payout from your wife's death, it makes you a perfect mark. Sign the deed and Liam walks. Simple." I gripped the phone tighter, her casual mention of Sarah's death like a knife to the gut. "You're destroying lives for money," I said, letting my voice tremble just enough. "How many others?" She took the bait, her tone smug. 20 homes in Pine Hollow alone. 50 million in profits. We've got this down to a science. Fines, foreclosures, fear. The HOA is untouchable. No oversight, no limits. Cops? Bought. The chief's kid got a full ride to college. The mayor's yacht didn't pay for itself. We're in 15 states, Ethan. 100 neighborhoods. You're just a pebble in our road. Every word was gold, piling up on the recorder. I kept her talking, my eyes scanning the factory's perimeter. "And Liam, he's just a kid." Her voice hardened. "Collateral. You're a soldier, you know how this works. Pressure points. You love that boy more than anything. Makes him the perfect lever." She paused, her smirk audible. "But you're special, Ethan. Most people fold when we lean on them. You fought back. I almost respect that." Almost. I spotted movement near the loading dock, a shadow shifting, the glint of metal. One of her goons, Vince, the granite-faced thug who'd cased my house. He carried a pistol, held low, his posture sloppy. I marked him, then checked the tracker. Liam was 50 yards inside, likely in the main warehouse. Alive. That was all I needed to know. "Let me talk to him," I said, my voice raw. "I need to know he's okay." Cassandra hesitated. Then I heard muffled voices. Liam's came through, small but steady. "Dad, I'm okay. They're mean, but I remembered what you taught me. I'm being brave." My heart swelled, pride cutting through the rage. "That's my boy," I said, my voice firm now. "Remember our song, the one Mom loved? It was our code. If he sang it right, he was unharmed. If he changed the words, he was in danger." His voice came back, clear as a bell. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Original lyrics. He was scared but whole. "Good. Hurry up, Caldwell," Cassandra snapped. "Bring the deed. Come alone. No tricks, or Liam learns what happens when you cross me." I ended the call, my mind racing. The fake deed was in my pocket, a prop to buy time. The real plan was already in motion. I'd called in my old unit, 6 brothers who'd bled with me in places the world doesn't name. Snipers, all of them, with eyes like hawks and hands steady as stone. They were out there now, ghosts in the dark, their rifles trained on the factory. I'd texted Detective Alvarez the coordinates, using a coded shorthand from my ops days. His reply was short. Backup ready, need probable cause. The recorder was my ace. I just needed Cassandra to bury herself. I approached the main entrance, hands raised, the deed visible. Vince met me at the door, his bulk filling the frame. He patted me down, rough, missing the recorder in my jacket's lining. No wire, no weapons, he grunted, his breath sour with cheap whiskey. Boss says you're smart for a jarhead. Don't prove her wrong. I bit back a retort, letting him think he'd won. Inside, the warehouse was a cavern of shadows, lit by flickering fluorescence. Old machinery rusted in corners, the floor stained with oil and time. Liam sat in the center, zip-tied to a metal chair, his eyes locked on me. When he saw me, his face lit up, but he stayed silent. Smart kid. My kid. Cassandra emerged from the gloom, flanked by two more goons. Lean, twitchy types with prison ink and cheap handguns. The setup was laughable. They'd bunched together, backs to the windows. No cover, no tactical spread. Bullies, not operators. They thought fear was enough. Cassandra's heels clicked on the concrete, her blazer pristine despite the filth around her. Mr. Caldwell, she said, her smile a venomous slash. The deed, please. I held it up but didn't hand it over. First, I want answers. How many families have you crushed? How deep does this go? She tilted her head, amused, like a cat toying with a mouse. You're stalling. Fine, I'll humor you. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. 43 properties in Pine Hollow and 4 other towns. $100 million in 3 years. The beauty of HOAs? They're legal extortion. We make the rules, levy the fines, foreclose when they can't pay. No one questions it. Not the banks, not the courts. We target the weak. Widows, single moms, old folks. They break fast. She gestured at Liam. Your profile was perfect. Widowed, isolated, military pension ripe for the taking. That corner lot? Developers are salivating. Once we rezone, it's a strip mall worth $10 million. I angled my body, ensuring the recorder caught every syllable. And the police? The mayor? She waved a hand, dismissive. Everyone's got a price. The chief's daughter got into Yale. The mayor's gambling debts vanished. 3 councilmen own condos in Miami, courtesy of our charitable fund. Even that cop you've been sniffing around, Alvarez? His sister's hospital bills are under review. He'll learn to play ball. Her confidence was her undoing. She thought she'd bought the world, thought no one could touch her. I pressed harder, my voice low, defeated. You've got it all figured out. No way out for me. Her smile widened, predatory. Exactly. This isn't just Pine Hollow, Ethan. We're a network. 200 HOAs across 15 states. We control property values, zoning boards, elections. In 10 years, we'll decide who lives where, who builds what. The American dream runs through us and we take our cut. She leaned in, her perfume cloying. But you could join us. A man like you, special forces, tactical mind, you'd be worth millions as our security chief. Sign the deed, work for us, and Liam gets the best of everything. Schools, vacations, a trust fund. Say yes, and this all goes away. The offer was a snake's whisper, tempting, calculated. They didn't just want my house. They wanted me, my skills, my silence. It made sense. Turn the threat into an asset. But they'd misread me. They thought a man who'd lost everything could be bought. That honor was a price tag. They didn't understand that some things, family, duty, the example you set for your son, were forged in blood, not dollars. I let the silence stretch, my face unreadable. That's a big offer, I said slowly. But what about the others? Margaret Lane, losing her home? George Tanner's sister, driven out? Cassandra's expression hardened, her mask slipping. Collateral damage, Colonel. You of all people should get that. How many died in your wars for freedom? This is no different. We're building an empire. Some eggs get broken. She nodded at Vince, who tightened his grip on Liam's shoulder. My son didn't flinch, his eyes fixed on me, trusting. I knelt, meeting his gaze, and whispered, "When I say storm, hit the floor. Got it?" He nodded, a flicker of a smile. "Brave as hell, my boy." I stood, facing Cassandra, the fake deed still in my hand. "One last thing," I said. "You ever think you picked the wrong guy to mess with?" Her brow furrowed, confusion flashing before fury took over. "You're out of moves, Ethan. Hand it over or—" I cut her off, my voice steel. "You forgot the first rule of war, Cassandra. Always secure your perimeter." Her eyes darted to the windows just as red laser dots bloomed on Vince's chest. Then the others. 6 snipers, my brothers, out there in the dark, each one a reaper with a scope. "Meet my team," I said, my smile cold. "You targeted a Marine. You targeted the Corps. Those sirens you're starting to hear? That's Alvarez, state police, and a few feds who don't take kindly to kidnapping and racketeering." Cassandra's face drained of color, her hand twitching toward her jacket. A pistol, poorly concealed. "Don't," I warned, my voice ablade. "My snipers had you zeroed since you opened your mouth. That confession? It's already on its way to the FBI. Awkward. I tapped my jacket where the recorder hummed. "Game over." "Storm!" I barked. Liam dropped flat, rolling under the chair. A flashbang shattered the window, light and sound exploding like a thunderclap. Vince lunged, but I was faster. A judo throw sending him crashing into a steel beam, out cold. The other goons froze, guns half raised as my team breached. Doors blasting open, boots pounding, rifles barking orders. "Down, down, hands where we can see them." Cassandra bolted for the loading dock, but Liam, my fearless kid, stuck out a foot, tripping her into a pile of crates. He looked up at me, grinning. "Oops." I was on her in a heartbeat, zip-tying her wrists, my knee pinning her to the concrete. "You messed with the wrong family," I growled. She snarled, spitting venom. "You think this stops us? You have no idea who you're fighting." I leaned close, my voice a low rumble. "I know exactly who you are, and I'm coming for all of them." Alvarez's team flooded in, cuffs snapping, radios crackling. Liam ran to me and I cut his ties, pulling him into a hug. "You okay, kid?" He nodded, eyes bright. "Knew you'd come, Dad. Always do." The recorder was gold. Every word of Cassandra's confession, from the $100 million scheme to the bribed officials, enough to bury her and her network. Alvarez took it, his face grim but satisfied. "This'll crack it wide open, Ethan. You did good." My team melted back into the night, ghosts again, but not before one clapped my shoulder. "Ura, brother. For Liam." I nodded, my throat tight. For Liam. Cassandra's empire was crumbling, but the war wasn't over. She was a cog, not the machine. The real fight, against the network she'd bragged about, was just beginning. But tonight I had my son, my mission was complete, and the enemy had learned a hard truth. You don't threaten a Marine's family and walk away. Not on my watch. The factory was a battlefield no more. Cassandra Wells, zip-tied and snarling, was dragged into a patrol car, her empire of greed crumbling under the weight of her own words. Vince, her granite-faced enforcer, lay unconscious, his bulk no match for a Marine's precision. The other goons, cowed by the red dots of my team's rifles, knelt with hands behind their heads as Alvarez's squad swarmed in, their radios crackling with the sound of justice finally waking up. Liam stood beside me, his small hand gripping mine, his eyes bright with a courage that burned hotter than any fire I'd faced in war. The night was ours, but the war wasn't over. I was Colonel Ethan Caldwell, and I'd just fired the first shot in a campaign to tear down the machine that dared threaten my son. Alvarez took the recorder, his face carved with respect. "This is dynamite, Ethan," he said, slipping it into an evidence bag. "Cassandra's confession, $100 million, bribed cops, a network across 15 states. It's enough to bring the whole thing down." I nodded, my jaw tight. "Make sure it gets to the right people. No leaks, no lost files." He met my eyes, a soldier's promise in his gaze. "You have my word. My state police contact is clean. This goes straight to the feds." I trusted him, not because he wore a badge, but because he'd proven he couldn't be bought. In a world of snakes that was rarer than gold. Liam tugged my sleeve, his voice steady despite the chaos. Dad, are we safe now? I knelt, looking into eyes that held Sarah's wisdom and my resolve. We're safe tonight, kid, but we're not done fighting. These people hurt a lot of folks. We're going to make sure they can't hurt anyone else. He nodded a soldier's nod, and I felt a surge of pride. At 10, he'd faced kidnappers and kept his head. My boy was steel. The aftermath unfolded like a well-executed op. My team, 6 snipers who'd answered my call without hesitation, slipped back into the shadows, their work done. They didn't need thanks. We were brothers, bound by blood in battles no one else would ever understand. One lingered, a grizzled master sergeant named Reyes, his eyes glinting with mischief. Your kid's got balls, Caldwell. Takes after his old man. He clapped Liam's shoulder, then vanished into the night. I smirked. High praise from a man who'd once taken out a warlord from a mile away. Back at Pine Hollow, the neighborhood stirred as dawn broke. Word of the takedown spread like wildfire, carried by cop radios and whispered rumors. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, their faces a mix of shock and relief. Margaret Lane, the widow who'd clung to her rose garden, stood at her gate, tears streaking her face. You did it, Ethan, she said, her voice trembling. You stopped them. I shook my head. We did it, Margaret. You held the line. That's what counts. She hugged me, her frail frame shaking, and for the first time, I saw hope in her eyes. Alvarez's team worked fast. Cassandra's confession was a roadmap, exposing a network called the Property Syndicate. Vince, facing a laundry list of charges, kidnapping, extortion, racketeering, flipped faster than a traitor in a war zone. I'll talk, he stammered as they loaded him into a van. Cassandra's just a cog. The real players call themselves the board. They've got HOAs in 12 states, lawyers who bury complaints, accountants who launder the cash. It's a machine. His cowardice was pathetic, but his intel was gold. The feds, led by an FBI corruption unit, pounced, raiding offices from Seattle to Miami. The syndicate's playbook was diabolical. They'd infiltrate HOAs, rig elections, and weaponize rules to target vulnerable homeowners. Fines piled up until victims broke, selling their homes for pennies. The properties were flipped to developers or shell companies, netting millions. They'd bribed cops, mayors, even judges, creating a shield of corruption. Pine Hollow was their crown jewel, a testing ground for tactics they planned to roll out nationwide. But they'd underestimated one thing, a Marine who didn't know how to lose. Pine Hollow began to heal. The HOA's grip shattered, its rules scrapped overnight. Fees dropped to nothing, fines vanished, and the ridiculous mailbox color mandates became a bitter joke. Margaret's roses bloomed brighter, a middle finger to the old regime. George Tanner, the retired mechanic who'd warned me, started a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely. No more suits telling us how to live, he growled at a community meeting, his voice rough with years of labor. The crowd roared approval, and I saw something I hadn't before: unity. Fear had kept them apart, but courage was knitting them back together. I met with Alvarez a week later, at the same diner 3 towns over. He slid a folder across the table, his eyes grim. The feds are moving fast. Cassandra's looking at 30 years minimum. Vince's testimony tied her to 3 state senators and a dozen city officials. They're all going down. He paused, stirring his coffee. But the board? They're ghosts. Shell companies, offshore accounts, encrypted communications. We'll get them, but it'll take time. I nodded, my mind already planning. What about Pine Hollow? Any blowback? He shook his head. Your neighbors are stepping up. Margaret's got recordings of HOA meetings going back years. Tanner's got photos of every violation notice. Even the mailman's been logging suspicious deliveries. This place is done being a victim. Liam became the neighborhood's quiet hero. At school, he started a watch club with his friends, teaching them to spot scams and report anything weird. No grown-up should ask you to keep secrets from your parents, he told them, his voice firm, echoing the lessons I drilled into him. The principal, a no-nonsense woman named Miss Carter, made it part of the curriculum. Your son's a leader, she told me at a parent-teacher conference. He's got a moral compass most adults lack. I smiled, pride burning in my chest. He gets it from his mom. The feds came knocking a month later. Special Agent Laura Bennett, a woman with a handshake like iron and eyes that missed nothing, sat me down at my kitchen table. Colonel Caldwell, your takedown exposed a national security threat. The syndicate wasn't just about money. They were targeting military families, exploiting relocations and PTSD to drive sales. We found manuals on how to push veterans' buttons. She slid an envelope across the table. The FBI wants you as a consultant. Your skills, your instincts, you're one of a kind. Help us finish this. I leaned back, the weight of her words settling in. The syndicate had profiled me, known my service record, my loss, my isolation. They'd seen a mark, not a man, but they'd also given me a new mission. I glanced at Liam, playing soccer in the backyard, his laughter a sound I'd die to protect. Part-time, I said finally. I'm a dad first. Bennett nodded, a rare smile breaking through. Fair enough, but Ethan, this fight's bigger than Pine Hollow. It's yours if you want it. The neighborhood changed in ways I hadn't expected. Block parties replaced HOA meetings, kids played in the streets without fear of noise complaints, and gardens sprouted with personality. Gnomes, flamingos, even a concrete dinosaur on Tanner's lawn. Margaret became the unofficial historian, documenting our fight in a scrapbook she shared at community events. This is for the kid, she said, her voice steady now, so they know what it means to stand up. I saw Sarah in her resilience, in the way she refused to break. It made the empty place at our dinner table ache a little less. But the syndicate's shadow lingered. Alvarez's task force, dubbed Iron Gate, after my call sign, uncovered similar schemes in dozens of towns. The board remained elusive, their names buried in layers of proxies and lies. I knew they'd come for me eventually. Men like that don't forgive a loss. I was ready. My cameras stayed active, my contacts on speed dial, my instincts sharper than ever. They'd started this war, but I'd finish it. For now, Pine Hollow was ours again. The fear was gone, replaced by something stronger. Trust. Neighbors who'd once avoided eye contact now shared beers over fences. Liam's watch club grew, his friends calling him Captain with grins that lit up the street. I coached his soccer team, finding purpose in teaching kids to fight as a unit, to never leave a man behind. We adopted a dog, a German Shepherd mix Liam named Sentinel, a nod to the note that had warned us. He patrolled our yard like a Marine, his bark a promise that no one would sneak up on us again. Cassandra's downfall was just the beginning. The feds followed the money, seizing accounts in the Caymans, Delaware, Dubai. 3 mayors resigned, 2 police chiefs retired, and a state senator vanished overnight, his mansion empty except for a half-packed suitcase. The media caught wind, headlines screaming, "Marine Dad dismantles criminal HOA empire." I turned down the talk shows, the book deals. This wasn't about fame, it was about home, about showing Liam that no enemy, no matter how powerful, could break us. As the dust settled, I stood in our backyard, watching Liam teach Sentinel to fetch. The stars were out, the neighborhood quiet, the air clean of fear. We'd won the battle, but the war was far from over. The syndicate was wounded, not dead, and I knew their kind. Cowards who hid behind money and lies. They'd come again, in a new form, a new place. Let them. I was Colonel Ethan Caldwell, and I'd be waiting. My son at my side, my brothers at my back, and a fire in my gut that no one could extinguish. Pine Hollow was no longer just a neighborhood, it was a stronghold, forged from the wreckage of fear and reclaimed by courage. 6 months after Cassandra Wells' empire fell, our streets pulsed with life. Kids raced bikes past gardens exploding with color, their laughter erasing the ghosts of fines and threats. Block parties lit up the nights, grills smoking, music thumping, neighbors dancing like they'd forgotten what it meant to live under a tyrant's thumb. The HOA was a husk, reduced to a handful of volunteers who cared about fixing streetlights, not wielding power. Margaret Lane's roses climbed her fence, a defiant blaze of red and white, each petal a middle finger to the old regime. George Tanner's neon green dinosaur sculpture stood tall, a prank by the kids that became a symbol of our rebellion. This was our home, one with blood, grit, and a refusal to break. I was Colonel Ethan Caldwell, and I'd fought for this, not just for Liam, my son, but for every soul crushed by the machine we'd torn apart. The collapse of the property syndicate was a shockwave. Cassandra's confession, paired with Vince's spineless betrayal, gave the feds everything they needed. 17 kingpins, lawyers, accountants, real estate moguls, faced indictments, their mansions seized, their names dragged through the dirt. The mysterious board, the syndicate's puppet masters, weren't untouchable anymore. The FBI froze their offshore accounts, raided their shell companies, and followed a money trail that led to a state senator who took a plea deal, his confession implicating a congressman who retired overnight. The media dubbed it the HOA scandal, but to us it was justice. Every arrest, every headline was a victory for the widows, single parents, and retirees who'd lost their homes, their savings, their hope. Liam became a local legend. His watch club, now called the Sentinels, after the cryptic note that warned us, grew to include kids from 3 schools. He taught his friends to spot scams, trust their gut, and never keep secrets from their parents. The school board asked him to record training videos, and there was my 10-year-old staring into the camera with eyes wiser than his years. "If an adult asks you to lie, they're not your friend," he said, his voice sharp as steel. "Tell someone you trust, always." Those videos went viral, adopted by school districts across the state. Sarah, his mother, would have beamed with pride. Hell, I was bursting with it. My son didn't just survive. He changed the rules of the game. I took a part-time consulting gig with the FBI, balancing it with coaching Liam's soccer team and hosting our weekly pizza nights. The public corruption unit needed me. My special forces training, my knack for sniffing out threats, my first-hand knowledge of the syndicate's playbook. I helped write a guide for spotting HOA fraud, trained agents to unravel corrupt networks, and spoke to communities about standing up to predators. But my first mission was always Liam. Every case I took, every scheme we crushed, was for him, to ensure no other kid faced the terror he'd endured. I'd promised Sarah I'd keep him safe, and I'd die before breaking that vow. Pine Hollow became a beacon. Reporters flocked to our streets, cameras capturing our story. We won the National Neighborhood Association's Best Community Turnaround Award, a plaque we hung in the community center, now renamed Lane Hall in Margaret's honor. At the ceremony, they asked me to speak. I stepped to the podium, Liam at my side, his city-issued Young Courage medal gleaming on his chest. I kept it short, my voice like iron. A year ago, we learned monsters don't always lurk in dark alleys. Sometimes they wear suits and carry clipboards. But we also learned heroes don't need capes. They're widows who tend roses, mechanics who document truth, kids who trust their instincts, neighbors who refuse to quit. This award belongs to Pine Hollow. We saved our home. More importantly, we found our family. The community grew stronger in ways I hadn't imagined. Margaret started a gardening club, teaching kids to plant seeds and nurture the earth. Tanner hosted car repair nights, showing teens how to change oil and fix brakes. The mailman, a quiet guy named Sam, became our unofficial lookout, logging every strange car, every odd delivery. Even Sentinel, our German Shepherd mix, had a role, patrolling the streets with Liam, accepting treats from neighbors who'd become kin. Empty houses filled with new families, drawn by our story of defiance. We told them what happened, not to scare them, but to show what's possible when people stand together. The syndicate's fallout rippled beyond Pine Hollow. Alvarez's Iron Gate Task Force exposed HOA scams in 40 cities, restoring homes to over 500 families. The state legislature drafted Liam's Law, a reform mandating transparency in HOA operations and shielding whistleblowers. Hearing my son's name tied to a law felt surreal, but if it spared another family our nightmare, every second of fear was worth it. Veterans groups mobilized, building networks to protect military families from similar abuses. My old unit launched a nonprofit, Veterans Against HOA Abuse, offering legal aid and support to those facing predators like the syndicate. What started as a fight for our home had sparked a movement. But victory wasn't absolute. The board, those shadow dwellers pulling the syndicate's strings, remained at large, their names buried in a maze of proxies and lies. The feds were closing in, but these were men who thrived in darkness, who struck from a distance. I knew they were watching, biding their time. Let them come. My house was a fortress, cameras, alarms, a neighborhood that had my back. My unit was a call away, Alvarez a text. And Liam, my unbreakable Liam, was sharper than ever, his eyes keen, his heart forged in fire. We'd face the abyss and come out stronger. The board could try their luck. We'd be ready. One evening, as we hosted a community pizza night, a tradition born from our newfound unity, a knock came at the door. A tall woman in a crisp suit stood on the porch, holding an official envelope. "Colonel Caldwell," she said, her voice steady. "Special Agent Riley, FBI Public Corruption Unit." The director wanted this delivered personally. Inside was a letter that hit like a mortar round. "Dear Colonel Caldwell," it read, "your actions in dismantling the property syndicate have saved countless communities and exposed a critical threat to our national security. Your tactical expertise, investigative instincts, and ability to rally a community under pressure are unmatched. We invite you to discuss a leadership role with our task force on organized crime in community institutions. Your unique blend of military experience and insight into these networks makes you invaluable." Liam, peeking over my shoulder, grinned. "Does this mean you're going to be a secret agent, Dad? Can I be your sidekick?" I laughed, ruffling his hair. "Let's see what they're offering, kid. You've got school, soccer, and your safety videos. You're already busy saving the world." But as I reread the letter, I felt the old pull, the same call I'd answered when I enlisted, when I swore to protect what mattered, to serve, to fight, to make a difference. Maybe it was time for a new mission. Riley smiled, reading my silence. "Take your time, Colonel. But for what it's worth, your country needs men like you. Men who know the biggest threats often hide in plain sight, wearing suits and running HOAs." She turned to leave, then paused. "And Liam, we've got a great internship program when you're older." Just saying. That night after Liam was asleep, I stood in the backyard staring at the stars. 6 months ago, Pine Hollow was enemy territory, a place where fear ruled every doorstep. Now it was home, in the truest sense. Not just a house, but a community that had faced darkness and chosen light. I'd turned down the FBI's leadership role but expanded my consulting work, traveling to train communities while staying the dad Liam needed. Every case was a promise kept, to Sarah, to Liam, to myself. Life found a new rhythm. Liam joined the swim team, his stroke strong like his mother's. I coached soccer, finding joy in teaching kids to fight as a team, to never leave a man behind. Sentinel became the neighborhood mascot, his evening patrols a ritual everyone loved. The empty chair at our table still ached, but we honored Sarah by living fully, helping others, standing for what's right. "Mom would have fought too, right, Dad?" Liam asked one night, gazing at her photo. "Without hesitation, kid," I said. "She was the bravest person I knew, until I met you." Sometimes in the quiet of night, I thought of Cassandra in her cell, stripped of her suits and her power. Did she ever wonder how it unraveled? Not by feds or laws, but by a kid who loved his father enough to break the rules, by neighbors who found strength in each other, by a man who refused to be prey? Mostly, I didn't think of her. I was too busy living, teaching Liam to ride his new bike, planning block parties with Margaret, consulting on cases that gave families their homes back. The best revenge wasn't vengeance. It was building something better from the ruins of what tried to destroy us. As the sun set over Pine Hollow, children's laughter echoed through streets once choked by fear. Garden lights twinkled without regulation. Neighbors chatted over fences without dreading violations. Somewhere, a committee planned the second annual Freedom from HOA Tyranny block party, complete with a dunk tank where kids would try to soak me while I wore a fake HOA president sash. Life was good. We were home. And to those still lurking with their suits and clipboards, a warning. Don't underestimate a Marine, a kid with courage, a community that won't break. When good people stand together, no scheme is too big to crumble, no corruption too deep to expose. Stand tall, fight hard, protect what's yours. This is Ethan Caldwell, signing off from Pine Hollow, where the HOA serves the people, the neighborhood watch has teeth, and the monsters learn the hard way what happens when you mess with a Marine's family. See you at the block party. Step outside or we'll drag you to our compliance center. That's what they barked at Nathan Daniels, thinking they could bully him with fake badges and flimsy handcuffs. But they didn't know they just woken a sleeping giant. In the manicured streets of Willow Creek, where every mailbox and lawn was held to a ruthless standard, a sinister scam lurked beneath the surface of suburban order. The Homeowners Association, once a symbol of community pride, had morphed into a predatory machine, extorting residents with absurd fines and threats of foreclosure over trivial violations. Enter Nathan Daniels, a volunteer deputy with an iron will and an unyielding sense of justice. What began as a confrontation over a mailbox escalated into a relentless crusade to expose a web of fraud, dismantle a corrupt HOA board, and restore power to a community crushed by greed. This is no ordinary tale of neighborhood drama. It's a gripping saga of defiance, betrayal, and triumph that will leave you questioning the true cost of unchecked power. Join us on HOA Karen Files as we dive into this explosive story of one man's stand against tyranny. Buckle up for a roller coaster of twists, from fake cops to secret bank accounts, and see how Willow Creek fought back. If you're hooked on stories of justice served and Karens brought to their knees, smash that subscribe button, hit the bell, and join our community in the comments to share your own HOA horror stories. Let's get started. Fake HOA thugs tried to arrest me over a mailbox. Here's how I exposed their massive scam. In the orderly suburb of Willow Creek, where conformity was law and deviations were punished, Nathan Daniels stood as a quiet sentinel of principle. A man of discipline, he lived by the rules but never bowed to tyranny. What began as an ordinary morning in his modest home escalated into a relentless battle against a sinister scam cloaked in the authority of the Homeowners Association, HOA. This is the story of Nathan's unyielding fight to expose fraud, dismantle corruption, and restore justice to a community held hostage by greed. The morning that changed everything. The first light of dawn crept through the blinds of Nathan Daniels' living room, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. At 6:47 a.m., the world outside Willow Creek was still, save for the faint chirping of sparrows and the occasional hum of a passing car. Nathan, a man in his early 40s with a weathered face that spoke of years spent upholding order, sat in his worn leather recliner. A steaming mug of black coffee rested in his left hand, its bitter aroma grounding him in the ritual of routine. In his right, he held the TV remote, though the screen remained dark. Mornings like this were sacred, moments of solitude before the demands of the day took hold. Nathan was no stranger to responsibility. A volunteer deputy with the county sheriff's office for over a decade, he carried the weight of duty with quiet resolve. In Willow Creek, he was known as a man who fixed problems, whether it was a neighbor's dispute or a stray dog causing havoc. His home, a single-story ranch with a neatly trimmed lawn, blended seamlessly into the neighborhood's uniformity. His mailbox, a standard black model, stood unremarkably at the curb. His porch held two simple wicker chairs, their cushions faded but functional. To the untrained eye, Nathan's life was unexceptional. But beneath the surface, he was a man of iron will, forged by years of confronting chaos with clarity. As he sipped his coffee, the tranquility of the morning was shattered by a sound that set his instincts on edge. A loud, aggressive knock at his front door. The force of it reverberated through the house, as if someone were trying to break through rather than announce their presence. Nathan's brow furrowed. He wasn't expecting visitors, and certainly not with such audacity. Setting his mug on the side table, he rose, his movements deliberate but unhurried. Years of training had taught him to approach the unknown with caution, not haste. He crossed the living room, the floorboards creaking faintly under his boots, and peered through the peephole. What he saw was so absurd it nearly drew a laugh. Three men stood on his porch, dressed in mismatched uniforms that looked like they'd been cobbled together from a thrift store. Their badges glinted in the morning light, but even through the distorted lens of the peephole, Nathan could tell they were cheap imitations. The tallest of the trio, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and mirrored sunglasses, stood at the forefront, his posture rigid, as if he were auditioning for a role in a low-budget crime drama. His two companions, younger and less assured, flanked him like nervous understudies. Nathan opened the door, his expression a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The mustached man stepped forward, his chest puffed out, and flashed a badge that looked more like a child's toy than an emblem of authority. "Sir," he said, his voice deep and rehearsed, "we need you to step outside immediately." Nathan crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "And who might you be?" "We're with the HOA Enforcement Unit," the man declared, his tone dripping with self-importance. His lackeys nodded in unison, one clutching a clipboard, the other fidgeting with what appeared to be a pair of flimsy handcuffs. Nathan blinked, his mind racing to process the absurdity. "The HOA has an enforcement unit now?" he asked, his voice laced with mockery. "We do," the mustached man replied, lifting his chin. "And we don't tolerate non-compliance." The words hung in the air, as ridiculous as they were ominous. Nathan had heard tales of the Willow Creek HOA's overzealous regulations. Fines for unapproved paint colors, warnings for overgrown hedges. But this was a new level of farce. He studied the trio, noting the ill-fitting uniforms, the nervous glances exchanged between the lackeys, and the mustached man's theatrical bravado. Something was wrong, and Nathan's instincts, honed by years of spotting deceit, told him this was no ordinary overreach. The mustached man reached into his pocket, producing a crumpled piece of paper. He unfolded it with exaggerated flourish, as if presenting a royal decree, and began to read. "You have been cited for an unapproved mailbox design and unauthorized lawn furniture." Nathan's gaze flicked to his mailbox, its black finish unmarred and identical to every other in the neighborhood, then to his porch, where the two wicker chairs sat innocently. "My mailbox?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "What's wrong with it?" "It doesn't conform to the HOA's latest aesthetic guidelines," one of the lackeys piped up, glancing at his clipboard as if it held the secrets of the universe. "And my lawn furniture?" Nathan pressed, gesturing to the chairs. "Unapproved," the mustached man stammered, his confidence wavering as he consulted his paper for support. Nathan fought the urge to laugh. The situation was so ludicrous it bordered on performance art. "So let me get this straight," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "You're trying to arrest me over a mailbox and some chairs?" "This isn't a joke," the mustached man snapped, stepping closer. "Non-compliance with HOA ordinances is a serious matter. You're coming with us." Nathan's amusement faded, replaced by a steely resolve. "And where exactly are you planning to take me?" "To our holding facility," the man replied, his chest swelling with false authority. Nathan couldn't hold back a chuckle. "You mean to tell me the HOA has a jail?" "It's not a jail," the man growled, his face reddening. "It's a compliance center." The words were so absurd Nathan nearly lost his composure, but the glint of the handcuffs in the second lackey's hand sobered him. This wasn't just a prank. These men, however ridiculous, believed they had the power to intimidate him, perhaps even detain him. The thought ignited a spark of defiance in Nathan's chest. He'd faced down real threats in his years as a deputy, from armed suspects to volatile disputes. He wasn't about to be cowed by a trio of imposters playing dress-up. "I see," Nathan said, rubbing his chin as if considering their demand. "Well, gentlemen, I hate to break it to you, but I'm a little busy today. I'll have to decline your invitation." The mustached man's patience snapped. "That's it," he shouted, his voice cracking with frustration. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Nathan didn't budge. "Or what?" he asked, his tone calm but unyielding. The second lackey stepped forward, brandishing the flimsy handcuffs. They looked like they'd snap under the slightest pressure, but the intent behind them was clear. "Do it now, sir, or we'll be forced to take action." Nathan's eyes narrowed. He'd seen enough. These men weren't just overzealous HOA busybodies. They were part of something darker, something that reeked of fraud. He shifted his stance, his hand brushing the small radio clipped to his belt. With a subtle press of a button, he sent a silent distress signal to his colleagues at the sheriff's office. The move was instinctual, a precaution born of years navigating danger. He kept his gaze locked on the mustached man, his expression betraying nothing. The mustached man grinned, mistaking Nathan's compliance for surrender. "That's right," he said smugly. "You're learning your place." Nathan's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Oh, I know my place," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made the lackeys shift uncomfortably. As the mustached man barked orders, Nathan calculated his next move. He could hear the faint hum of sirens in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The imposters hadn't noticed, too consumed by their own performance. Nathan let them talk, let them dig their own grave, as he prepared to turn the tables. The morning that had begun with coffee and calm was now a battleground. Nathan Daniels, a man who valued order but despised tyranny, stood ready to expose the truth. The HOA's so-called enforcement unit had picked the wrong man to intimidate, and they were about to learn just how costly that mistake would be. The air on Nathan Daniels' front porch crackled with tension, the morning sun casting harsh shadows across the three imposters who dared to challenge him. The mustached man, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting Nathan's unyielding gaze, stood rigid, his faux authority fraying at the edges. His two lackeys, one clutching a clipboard, the other fumbling with flimsy handcuffs, shifted nervously, their confidence eroding under the weight of Nathan's calm defiance. The distress signal Nathan had sent moments earlier hummed silently in the background, a lifeline to the real law enforcement closing in. But Nathan wasn't waiting for backup to take control. He was done playing their game. The mustached man, sensing his grip on the situation slipping, leaned forward, his voice a forced growl. "You're making a mistake, Daniels. Step outside or we'll drag you out." Nathan's lips curled into a faint, steely smile. "Try it," he said, his tone low and unyielding, each word a challenge carved in iron. The second lackey, a wiry young man with a nervous twitch, took a hesitant step forward, raising the handcuffs as if they carried real weight. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he stammered, his voice betraying his fear. Nathan's eyes locked onto him, piercing through the facade. "Son, those cuffs wouldn't hold a toddler. Put them away before you embarrass yourself further." The mustached man's face reddened, his patience snapping like a brittle twig. "Enough!" he barked, reaching for Nathan's arm in a desperate bid to assert dominance. It was the wrong move. In a single fluid motion, Nathan sidestepped, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it with practiced precision. The mustached man yelped, his sunglasses sliding down his nose as Nathan spun him around, pinning his arm behind his back and forcing him against the hood of their unmarked SUV. The impact sent a dull thud echoing across the quiet street, the vehicle's HOA enforcement logo glaring under the morning light. The clipboard lackey froze, his papers fluttering to the ground, while the handcuff wielder stumbled backward, his bravado evaporating. "Stay down," Nathan commanded, his voice a blade cutting through the chaos. The mustached man struggled briefly, but Nathan's grip was unrelenting, a testament to years spent subduing real threats. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, slicing through the morning stillness. The lackeys exchanged panicked glances, their amateurish scheme unraveling before their eyes. Nathan leaned close to the mustached man, his voice a low growl. "You picked the wrong house. Now let's talk about who's really under arrest." Before the imposters could react, two sheriff's department squad cars screeched into Nathan's driveway, their red and blue lights painting the street in stark relief. Deputy Ryan Brooks, a seasoned officer with a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped out of the lead vehicle, his hand resting casually on his duty belt. His sharp eyes scanned the scene, Nathan holding the mustached man against the SUV, the two lackeys frozen like deer in headlights, and a crowd of curious neighbors beginning to gather at the edge of their lawns. "Boss," Ryan called, his tone carrying a hint of amusement as he raised an eyebrow. "Mind telling me why you're wrestling a guy in what looks like a Halloween costume?" Nathan released the mustached man, stepping back and brushing his hands off as if ridding himself of filth. "These three were attempting an unlawful arrest," he said, his voice steady but laced with contempt. "Claimed their HOA enforcement, citing me for my mailbox and chairs. Tried to cuff me and take me to their compliance center." Ryan's gaze shifted to the trio, his expression hardening. "IDs. Now," he ordered, his voice flat but commanding. The mustached man, still rubbing his wrist, tried to regain his composure. He straightened his sunglasses and puffed out his chest, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. "We're authorized by the Willow Creek HOA," he said, producing a wallet and handing over a plastic badge engraved with HOA Compliance Officer. It was laughably crude, the kind of trinket sold at party stores. Ryan flipped the badge over, inspecting it with a smirk. "You've got to be kidding me. This wouldn't pass muster at a school play." He raised his eyes to meet the mustached man's. "Which department issued this? Because I've never heard of an HOA running a SWAT team." The mustached man faltered, glancing nervously at his lackeys. We were authorized by the HOA board to enforce neighborhood regulations," he said, his voice wavering. Ryan's eyebrow arched. "Authorized? Where's the paperwork? I don't see anything here that checks out." "You're not even registered as security guards, let alone cops." The clipboard lackey, a lanky man with shaggy hair, piped up, his voice cracking. "We've got jurisdiction over this whole neighborhood. The board told us to do this." Ryan turned to Nathan, his expression skeptical. "You sign off on any of this?" Nathan shook his head, his eyes never leaving the imposters. "Not a chance. This is as bogus as it gets." Ryan exhaled sharply, his patience thinning. He flipped through the fake IDs, each one more pathetic than the last, and turned back to the mustached man. "So, let me get this straight. You've been running around, pretending to be law enforcement, threatening people over mailboxes and lawn chairs? That's your big plan?" The mustached man's face flushed, his voice rising in desperation. "It's not like that. We're enforcing compliance. People need to follow the rules." Nathan stepped forward, his presence commanding the scene. "Compliance," he said, his voice cold and cutting. "You're extorting homeowners with fake fines. That's not enforcement. That's a shakedown." Ryan nodded, his disgust palpable. He turned to the shaggy-haired lackey. "How much were you charging people for these violations?" The lackey shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to his comrades. No one spoke. Nathan crossed his arms, his gaze unrelenting. "No answers? That's fine. Let's check your vehicle." Ryan didn't wait for permission. He strode to the SUV, its garish HOA logo a mockery of legitimacy, and yanked open the driver's side door. Inside, he found a treasure trove of evidence. Stacks of ticket books, printed fine notices with fabricated violations, and a small metal cash box bulging with bills and checks. He let out a low whistle, pulling out the cash box and holding it up for Nathan to see. "Well, well, well," Ryan said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Looks like someone's been raking in more than just HOA dues." Nathan joined him, bending over to inspect the contents. The ticket books listed absurd violations: unapproved flower beds, non-compliant fence heights, even unauthorized birdhouses. The fine notices demanded payments ranging from $200 to $2,000, with threats of liens or foreclosure for non-compliance. The cash box contained thousands in small bills, likely collected from intimidated residents too afraid to question the officers. "This isn't enforcement," Nathan said, his voice a low rumble. "This is a racket." Ryan slammed the SUV door, his expression grim. He turned to the imposters, who stood frozen, their faces pale with the realization that their scheme was collapsing. "You've been making threats, collecting fake fines, and impersonating law enforcement," Ryan said, his voice sharp. "That's fraud, extortion, and a whole lot of jail time." The mustached man, his bravado gone, made a last-ditch effort to salvage his position. "We were just following orders," he blurted, his voice cracking. "The HOA board told us to do this. They promised us a cut of the fines." Nathan's eyes narrowed, his suspicion confirmed. "Orders from who, exactly?" "The board," the mustached man muttered, his gaze dropping to the ground. They said we could keep 30% of whatever we collected. Ryan exchanged a glance with Nathan, his eyes widening. Sounds like we're dealing with a bigger problem than a few fake cops, he said, his tone resolute. This goes straight to the top. Nathan stepped closer to the mustached man, his voice a controlled burn. You've been scamming your neighbors, threatening their homes, their livelihoods, for a cut of the profits, and you thought you'd get away with it? The lackeys fidgeted, their fear palpable. The shaggy-haired one dropped his clipboard, its pages scattering across the lawn. The handcuff wielder looked like he might bolt, but the sight of Ryan's hand resting on his holster kept him rooted in place. Ryan took charge, his voice cutting through the tension. You're under arrest for impersonating law enforcement, fraud, and extortion. Hands behind your backs. The mustached man made a feeble attempt to flee, lunging toward the SUV, but Nathan was faster. With a swift move, he grabbed the man's arm, twisting it behind his back and forcing him to the ground with controlled force. Nice try, Nathan said, his voice laced with grim satisfaction. But you're not going anywhere. Ryan cuffed the mustached man, his movements swift and precise, while another deputy secured the lackeys. The shaggy-haired one dropped to his knees, muttering, "We didn't mean for it to go this far," but his words fell on deaf ears. Nathan stood tall, his gaze sweeping over the scene. The squad car's lights flashed, neighbors whispered in awe, and the imposter's reign of terror ended in handcuffs. But Nathan knew this was only the beginning. The real culprits, the HOA board pulling the strings, were still out there, hiding behind their titles and bank accounts. He turned to Ryan, his expression resolute. "We've got the pawns," Nathan said, his voice a vow. "Now we go for the kings." The crowd of neighbors grew, their murmurs turning to cheers as the fake officers were loaded into the squad cars. Willow Creek was waking up, and with it, a spark of rebellion against the corruption that had held them captive. Nathan felt the weight of their trust, their hope, and he vowed not to let it falter. The takedown was complete, but the war was far from over. The dust of the morning's confrontation still lingered in the air as Nathan Daniels and Deputy Ryan Brooks stood amidst the flashing lights of the squad cars. The three fake officers, their cheap uniforms now rumpled and their bravado shattered, were secured in the back of the sheriff's vehicles, their faces ashen with the weight of their unraveling scheme. The neighborhood of Willow Creek buzzed with a mix of shock and tentative hope as residents gathered in small clusters, whispering about the audacity of the imposters and the swift justice Nathan had delivered. But Nathan's focus was elsewhere. The pawns had been taken, but the real architects of this fraud, the HOA board, remained untouched, hiding behind their polished titles and air-conditioned offices. Nathan's jaw tightened as he turned to Ryan, his voice low and resolute. "These clowns were just the muscle. The board's the head of this snake, and I'm not letting it slither away." Ryan nodded, his eyes scanning the crowd of neighbors, some clutching receipts, others holding crumpled fine notices. "We've got enough to start building a case," he said, his tone as hard as granite. "But we need to move fast. If the board gets wind of this, they'll start covering their tracks." Nathan's gaze drifted to the HOA office, a nondescript brick building at the edge of Willow Creek's central square. It was a place most residents avoided, a fortress of bureaucracy where complaints went to die and fines were borne. Behind its glass doors, the board members sat, insulated by their self-appointed authority, believing themselves untouchable. Nathan's blood simmered at the thought. They had preyed on their neighbors, weaponizing petty rules to extort thousands, threatening homes and livelihoods for profit. This wasn't just greed, it was betrayal, a violation of the trust that bound a community together. "Let's go," Nathan said, his voice a command. "We end this now." The two men moved with purpose, their boots crunching against the gravel as they crossed the street toward the HOA office. The crowd parted to let them pass, their murmurs growing louder, a chorus of support and anger. An elderly woman, her hands trembling as she clutched a stack of fine notices, called out, "Sheriff Daniels, make them pay!" Nathan gave her a curt nod, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every resident who had been silenced, bullied, or bankrupted by the board's greed. Inside the HOA office, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The air was cool, the hum of fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow over polished wood paneling and framed certificates touting community excellence. The receptionist, a young woman with a nervous smile, looked up as Nathan and Ryan entered, her eyes widening at the sight of their badges. "Sheriff Daniels, Deputy Brooks," she stammered, rising from her chair. Is something wrong?" "We need to see the board," Nathan said, his tone leaving no room for debate. "Now." The receptionist hesitated, her fingers hovering over the phone. "They're in a meeting. I can tell them to clear their schedule," Ryan cut in, his voice sharp, "unless they want us to drag them out in cuffs." The receptionist swallowed hard, then picked up the phone, her voice trembling as she relayed the message. Moments later, a door at the end of the hallway opened, and Alan Moore, the HOA board president, emerged. A thin man in his late 50s, Alan carried himself with the practiced arrogance of someone accustomed to power. His suit, though expensive, hung loosely on his frame, and a nervous twitch in his left eye betrayed his unease. Behind him, the other board members followed, 4 men and 2 women, their expressions a mix of feigned confidence and barely concealed panic. "Sheriff Daniels, Deputy Brooks," Alan said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This is unexpected. To what do we owe the visit?" Nathan stepped forward, his presence filling the room. "Don't play dumb, Moore. We just arrested 3 of your so-called enforcement officers for impersonating law enforcement, fraud, and extortion. They're singing like canaries and they're pointing the finger at you." Alan's smile faltered, his twitch intensifying. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice strained. "We hired those men to enforce our regulations, nothing more. If they overstepped, that's on them." Nathan's eyes narrowed, his voice a controlled burn. "Overstepped? They were shaking down residents for thousands, threatening foreclosures over mailboxes and lawn chairs. And they did it on your orders." The board members shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to one another. A woman in a navy blazer, her hair pulled into a tight bun, spoke up, her voice shrill. "We had no knowledge of any illegal activity. We trusted those men to act within the law." Ryan snorted, pulling a stack of papers from his satchel, the evidence collected from the imposter's SUV. "Then explain this," he said, slamming the papers onto the conference table. Ticket books, fine notices, and bank records spilled across the polished surface, each document a damning testament to the board's complicity. "These show fines funneled into your personal accounts. You didn't just know about the scam, you orchestrated it." Alan's face turned a sickly shade of pale, his hands trembling as he reached for a glass of water. This is a mistake," he stammered. "We were trying to maintain order. Residents were complaining about non-compliant properties. We thought, You thought you could line your pockets by terrorizing your neighbors," Nathan interrupted, his voice ablaze. "You turned this community into your personal ATM, and you didn't care who got hurt." The room fell silent, the weight of Nathan's words settling like a storm cloud. The board members, once so assured in their authority, now looked like cornered animals. One of the men, a heavy-set figure with a receding hairline, tried to deflect. "We had legal counsel. We were told our actions were within our rights." Ryan's eyes flashed with contempt. "Your counsel can join you in court then. You signed off on fake citations, authorized illegal arrests, and pocketed the profits. That's not governance. That's organized crime." Nathan stepped closer to Alan, his voice low and menacing. "You threatened people with losing their homes. You made them live in fear, all so you could buy another vacation house or a fancy car. Did you think no one would fight back?" Alan's shoulders slumped, his facade crumbling. He stared at his hands, unable to meet Nathan's gaze. We didn't mean for it to go this far," he muttered. "The fines were supposed to be a deterrent. When the money started coming in, it got out of hand." "Out of hand?" Nathan repeated, his voice rising with controlled fury. "You extorted thousands from people who trusted you. You betrayed this community, and now you're going to answer for it." Ryan flipped through the financial records, his finger jabbing at a series of transactions. These show over $200,000 in fines deposited into accounts linked to this board. You didn't just profit, you built a system to keep the cash flowing. That's not a mistake. That's a conspiracy. The board members exchanged panicked glances, their unity fracturing. The woman in the blazer whispered to her colleague, her voice barely audible, "We need to call our lawyer." "You'll get your phone call," Ryan said, his tone icy, "right after we book you for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy." Nathan's gaze swept the room, locking eyes with each board member. "You thought you were untouchable, sitting in your fancy office, writing rules to bleed this neighborhood dry. But you underestimated Willow Creek. You underestimated me." Alan slumped into a chair, his face a mask of resignation. The other board members followed suit, their defiance evaporating as the reality of their situation sank in. Nathan and Ryan stood like sentinels, their presence a promise of justice. The evidence was ironclad, the witnesses numerous, and the community's anger a tidal wave ready to crash. As Ryan began reading the board members their rights, Nathan stepped to the window, looking out at the growing crowd outside. Neighbors held signs scrawled with demands for justice, their voices rising in a chant that echoed through the square. An older man, his face lined with years of worry, clutched a receipt for a $1,500 fine he'd paid to save his home. A young mother stood beside him, her eyes fierce as she recounted threats over her non-compliant garden. Willow Creek was no longer a community of silent victims. It was a force awakened, united by the truth Nathan had uncovered. Ryan joined Nathan at the window, his voice quiet but firm. "This isn't the end, you know. We've got the board, but we need to follow the money. Make sure no one else is pulling strings." Nathan nodded, his expression resolute. "We'll tear this thing apart piece by piece. No one gets away with betraying these people." As the board members were led out in handcuffs, the crowd erupted in cheers, their voices a thunderous declaration of victory. Nathan felt the weight of their trust, their gratitude, and he carried it like armor. The masterminds had been unmasked, their empire of fraud exposed to the light. But the fight for Willow Creek was far from over. Nathan would see it through, no matter the cost, until every cent was returned and every wrong made right. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over Willow Creek as the last of the HOA board members were led away in handcuffs. The once sterile square outside the HOA office now pulsed with life, a sea of residents united in a shared reckoning. The air was thick with the sounds of voices, angry, relieved, triumphant, mingling with the fading wail of police sirens. Nathan Daniels stood at the edge of the crowd, his arms crossed, his weathered face set in a mask of quiet resolve. Beside him, Deputy Ryan Brooks surveyed the scene, his sharp eyes noting every detail. The elderly couple clutching receipts for fines they'd paid under duress. The young father holding his daughter's hand as he recounted threats over a non-compliant fence. The group of women exchanging stories of fear and defiance. Willow Creek was no longer a neighborhood cowed by tyranny. It was a community reborn, forged in the fire of truth. The takedown of the HOA board had been swift and merciless, but Nathan knew the wounds they'd inflicted ran deep. For months, perhaps years, the board had operated like a shadow government, wielding petty regulations as weapons to extort their neighbors. Fines for unapproved mailboxes, threats of foreclosure over lawn ornaments, demands for thousands to correct imaginary violations. These were not mere annoyances, but assaults on the dignity of every resident. The evidence Ryan had uncovered, bank records showing over $200,000 funneled into the board's personal accounts, fake citations issued by imposters posing as law enforcement, painted a picture of calculated greed. Yet as Nathan looked out at the faces of his neighbors, he saw not just victims, but survivors, ready to reclaim their power. A murmur rippled through the crowd as an older man, his faded golf cap tilted at an angle, stepped forward. His name was Henry Caldwell, a retired mechanic who had lived in Willow Creek for 3 decades. His hands trembled as he held up a crumpled fine notice. Its ink faded, but its threat still potent. $2,500 for an unauthorized shed he'd built to store his tools. "Sheriff Daniels," Henry called, his voice rough but steady. They told me I'd lose my house if I didn't pay. I scraped together every penny, went without groceries for weeks. Is this really over? Nathan met Henry's gaze, his voice firm but laced with empathy. It's over for them, Henry. Hold on to that notice. We'll make sure you get every cent back, and then some. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices rising like a tide. Henry's eyes glistened, a weight lifting from his shoulders as he nodded, clutching the notice to his chest. Nathan's promise was not just words, it was a vow, backed by the iron will that had carried him through the morning's confrontation and the unmasking of the board's corruption. He knew the road ahead would be long, with legal battles and financial audits to ensure justice was served, but for now the people of Willow Creek needed hope, and he would give it to them. Ryan clapped Nathan on the shoulder, his voice low. You've got their trust, boss. That's no small thing. But this isn't just about refunds. We need to make sure this never happens again. Nathan nodded, his jaw tightening. We'll tear their system apart. No more fake fines, no more threats. These people deserve a neighborhood that serves them, not exploits them. As the squad cars pulled away, carrying the disgraced board members to the precinct, the crowd began to organize. A woman in her 50s, her hair streaked with gray, stepped forward with a clipboard of her own. Not a tool of oppression, but a symbol of action. Her name was Clara Evans, a former school teacher known for her sharp mind and unyielding spirit. Sheriff Daniels, Deputy Brooks, she said, her voice cutting through the noise, we're starting a committee. We want oversight, transparency, and a new board that answers to us. Will you back us? Nathan's eyes met Clara's, recognizing the fire of someone who had been pushed too far. You've got my support, he said, his tone resolute, and the sheriff's department's. We'll work with you to rebuild this HOA from the ground up. Clara's lips curved into a determined smile, and the crowd murmured in approval. The idea of a community-led HOA, free from the corruption that had plagued it, sparked a new energy. Neighbors began sharing ideas, monthly open meetings, public financial reports, elected board members with term limits. A young man, his sleeves rolled up to reveal tattoos from his time in the military, suggested a neighborhood watch to ensure no one could impersonate authority again. An elderly woman, her voice soft but firm, proposed a fund to help residents recover from the fines they'd paid. Each voice added to a growing chorus, a blueprint for a Willow Creek that stood for its people, not against them. Nathan listened, his heart heavy with the weight of what had been lost, but buoyed by the strength of what was being built. He thought of the stories he'd heard that day. Families who had drained their savings to avoid foreclosure, retirees who had lived in fear of losing their homes, single parents who had faced impossible choices to appease the HOA's demands. The board's greed had fractured the community, but now, in the wake of their downfall, Willow Creek was stitching itself back together, stronger than before. As the crowd dispersed, some heading to the community center to begin organizing, others lingering to share their stories, Nathan and Ryan walked toward their patrol car. The square, now bathed in the soft light of dusk, felt different. Lighter, as if the shadow of fear had lifted. But Nathan's mind was already on the next steps. The financial records needed to be audited, the board's assets frozen, and every resident compensated. There were questions, too, about how deep the corruption ran, whether the board had connections to other scams, or if their legal counsel had been complicit. Nathan would leave no stone unturned. Ryan glanced at him, his expression a mix of exhaustion and pride. You know, for a volunteer deputy, you've got a hell of a knack for shaking things up. Nathan gave a small, grim smile. Just doing my job, but this one's personal. These are my neighbors. As they reached the car, a young girl, no older than 10, ran up, her pigtails bouncing. She held out a folded piece of paper, her eyes wide with admiration. Mr. Daniels, I drew this for you, she said, thrusting the paper into his hands. Nathan unfolded it, revealing a crayon sketch of a man in a sheriff's hat standing in front of a house, a crowd cheering behind him. The words "Our Hero" were scrawled in uneven letters at the top. Nathan's throat tightened, a rare moment of softness breaking through his steely exterior. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "This means a lot." The girl beamed and ran back to her mother, who waved gratefully. Nathan tucked the drawing into his pocket, a reminder of why he fought. Not for glory, but for people like her. Ordinary lives caught in the crosshairs of greed, now free to thrive. As Nathan and Ryan drove toward the station, the fading light painted the horizon in hues of orange and purple. Willow Creek settled into a new rhythm, its streets alive with the sounds of neighbors reconnecting, planning, and healing. The HOA's reign of terror was over, replaced by a community that refused to be silenced. Nathan knew the work was far from done, but for the first time in years, he felt the pulse of something greater than justice. Hope. Willow Creek was reborn, and he would stand guard to ensure it never fell again. 6 months had passed since the handcuffs clicked shut on the HOA board members, their empire of fraud crumbling under the weight of truth. Willow Creek, once a neighborhood suffocated by fear and petty tyranny, now breathed freely, its streets alive with the hum of a community rediscovered. The scars of the HOA's reign remained: empty savings accounts, lingering distrust, stories of hardship whispered over backyard fences. But they were healing, stitched together by the resilience of those who had stood up and said, "No more." At the heart of this transformation stood Nathan Daniels, a man whose name had become synonymous with justice, though he wore the title of hero with quiet unease. On a crisp autumn morning, Nathan stood on his front porch, his black mailbox gleaming in the sunlight, its standard design a silent testament to the absurdity that had sparked his fight. His two wicker chairs, once deemed unauthorized, sat proudly, their faded cushions now joined by a small table where neighbors often stopped to share coffee and stories. The air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant laughter of children playing in the park, a sound that had been muted during the HOA's darkest days. Nathan sipped his coffee, the same bitter blend he'd always favored, and surveyed the neighborhood. It was different now, stronger, united, alive. The aftermath of the HOA scandal had been as relentless as Nathan's pursuit of justice. The financial audits, led by a task force that included Clara Evans and other community leaders, uncovered a web of corruption that stretched beyond Willow Creek. The board's ill-gotten gains, over $300,000 in total, had been funneled through shell accounts, some linked to a shady real estate firm with ties to other HOAs across the county. Every cent was seized, and a restitution fund was established to repay residents who had been extorted. Henry Caldwell, the retired mechanic who had gone without groceries to pay a $2,500 fine, received his refund with a handwritten apology from the new HOA board, a gesture that brought tears to his eyes. Families like the young mother who had faced threats over her garden were compensated, their faith in their community slowly restored. The legal battles were fierce but decisive. Alan Moore and his fellow board members faced charges of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy, their trials a public reckoning that drew crowds to the courthouse. The fake officers, desperate to lessen their sentences, turned state's evidence, revealing the board's explicit instructions to intimidate and extort. The testimony was damning and the convictions unanimous. Alan, once a smug tyrant in an ill-fitting suit, was sentenced to 7 years, his nervous twitch now a permanent fixture as he was led away. The others received similar fates, their wealth and status stripped away, leaving them to face the consequences of their greed. But justice was more than punishment. It was rebuilding. The new HOA, born from Clara's community committee, operated with transparency and accountability. Monthly meetings were held in the community center, open to all, with financial reports posted online and board members elected by popular vote. Term limits ensured no one could cling to power, and a neighborhood watch led by the tattooed veteran who had spoken up that fateful day patrolled to keep imposters at bay. The restitution fund grew into a community trust, supporting projects like a new playground and a scholarship for local students. Willow Creek was no longer just a place to live. It was a place to belong. Nathan remained a volunteer deputy, his days filled with the same quiet duties that had always defined him: mediating disputes, checking on elderly residents, teaching kids to ride bikes safely. But his role in the HOA takedown had changed how Willow Creek saw him. Children drew pictures of Sheriff Daniels in their classrooms, their crayons capturing his sheriff's hat in resolute stance. Neighbors stopped by with homemade pies or invitations to barbecues, their gratitude unspoken but palpable. At the community app store, By the Iron Stand, A Tale of Defiance Against HOA Fraud by XAI ebook, first drawing of Nathan, a simple stick figure with a sheriff's hat, still hung on his fridge, a talisman of the day he'd stood up for his community. Yet Nathan shunned the spotlight. When Clara and the new board proposed naming a park after him, he declined, his voice firm. "This wasn't about me," he said at a community meeting, his words carrying the weight of truth. "It was about all of us. Let's keep it that way." Instead, the park was named Unity Green, a nod to the collective strength that had toppled the HOA's tyranny. Nathan attended its opening, standing at the back of the crowd, his arms crossed as children played on swings and neighbors laughed over picnic tables. He didn't speak, but his presence was enough, a quiet guardian watching over a community reborn. Not all wounds healed easily. Some residents, burned by years of betrayal, remained wary, attending meetings with skeptical eyes, questioning every decision. Nathan understood their caution. Trust, once shattered, took time to rebuild. He made a point to attend every HOA meeting, not as a leader but as a neighbor, listening, nodding, offering a steady presence. When disputes arose over fence heights or tree placements, he mediated with the same calm resolve he'd shown that morning on his porch, reminding everyone that rules existed to serve the community, not to oppress it. One evening, as Nathan sat on his porch, a familiar figure approached, Ryan Brooks, now promoted to sergeant, his badge glinting in the fading light. Ryan carried 2 beers, handing one to Nathan as he settled into the second wicker chair. The 2 men sat in comfortable silence, the clink of their bottles a small toast to their shared victory. "You ever think about running for sheriff?" Ryan asked, his tone half serious. "You'd win in a landslide." Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm no politician. I'll stick to keeping the peace right here." Ryan grinned, taking a sip. "Fair enough, but you've got a legacy now, Nate. This place won't forget what you did." Nathan's gaze drifted to the horizon, where Unity Green's lights glowed softly against the dusk. He thought of the girl who'd given him the drawing, of Henry's trembling hands holding his refund check, of Clara's fierce determination to rebuild. His legacy wasn't in statues or titles. It was in the laughter of children, the open doors of neighbors, the absence of fear. "Maybe," Nathan said, his voice low and steady, "but the real legacy is them. They're the ones who stood up." As night fell, Willow Creek settled into a gentle rhythm, its streets safe, its people empowered. The HOA scandal had been a crucible, testing the community's spirit and forging it anew. Nathan Daniels, the man who had sparked the fire, remained its quiet protector, his coffee mug ready for the next morning, his resolve unbroken. The iron stand had held, and Willow Creek would never fall again. "Oh my God, the dam's gone!" That was the first scream. 2:37 a.m., followed by the unmistakable roar of floodwater tearing through vinyl fences and backyard koi ponds like they were made of paper. But let me back up, because this flood wasn't just a freak act of nature. This was the result of one HOM, one woman with a clipboard, and one very bad decision. Welcome to HOA Karen Files, where we dig into real-life stories of HOA madness, overreach, and destruction, both legal and literal. And today's story? Let's just say they tried to erase a dam, but they ended up drowning their entire neighborhood instead. You're going to want to watch this to the end. HOA demolished my dam without warning, so nature demolished their entire neighborhood. The sound hit before the meaning did. At first, I thought it was a thunderclap, a deep, hollow cracking noise that shook the window panes and made my coffee ripple like something out of Jurassic Park. Then came the vibration. It rumbled up through the floorboards of my cabin and into my bare feet like a warning tremor before the real quake hits. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. I set my mug down, still steaming, and opened the front door. Dust. So much dust. It hung in the air like a curtain, catching the morning sun in streaks of gold and gray. And through it, I saw a silhouette. No, several, just barely visible against the haze. A backhoe's claw raised high like a metal vulture. The silhouette of three people in lawn chairs, watching. And the hole. The gaping, gut-wrenching hole where my dam used to be. I stepped out, still in my flannel pajama pants and a faded t-shirt that said, "Got water?" and stared. Gone. It was gone. 3 years of work, 3 years of hand-hauling stone, reinforcing retaining walls, calibrating spillways. All of it leveled in a single morning, flattened like an anthill under a boot. One of the women, Karen, of course it was Karen, was wearing a beauty pageant sash that read, "I kid you not, water belongs to the HOA." She sipped from a Starbucks cup like this was her Saturday entertainment, not the illegal demolition of a functional stormwater retention system. I didn't move. Not at first. My brain was still buffering. This wasn't just about a dam. It was about control and power and ignorance dressed up in vinyl siding and a sense of suburban entitlement. But I guess if I want to tell you the full story, how we got here, why that dam mattered, and what came next, I need to rewind the tape. Because like every great disaster, it didn't start with thunder. It started with silence. 3 years ago, I bought a plot of land at the top of Ridge Hollow. It was the kind of place you'd call rugged if you were being polite. Overgrown, pockmarked with erosion gullies, and completely neglected. But I saw potential. I saw what it could be. More importantly, I saw what lay beneath it. A watershed. A small but vital drainage path that every 5 to 7 years used to flood the entire development below. Oak Hills Estates, a planned community of cloned beige homes, tightly clipped lawns, and an HOA with a god complex, sat directly downhill. They were blissfully unaware that their peaceful little cul-de-sac existed at the mercy of gravity and clay-heavy soil. I wasn't. My late uncle, a retired Army Corps hydrological engineer, taught me to read terrain like a weathered map. Together, over beer and graph paper, we designed a runoff system for my property that would both preserve the hillside and protect the people below. The dam was the final piece, a reinforced earth barrier with a manual sluice gate and French drains to release overflow gradually. I filed the permits. All of them. With the county, with the state's water board, with the regional flood management district. I crossed every T and dotted every I because I knew one day someone would come sniffing around. But for the first 2 years, nobody did. The dam did its job in silence. The flood stopped. Yards stayed dry. No one even noticed. Until Karen moved in. She arrived like a weather front, sharp, cold, and full of thunder. Within weeks, she was elected HOA president, mostly because no one else wanted the job. But she took to it like a mall cop with a new whistle. Suddenly, residents were getting notices for non-regulation bird feeders and unsanctioned lawn gnomes. The kind of tyranny only an idle mind with a printer and a copy of the bylaws could invent. And then she noticed her yard wasn't flooding anymore. That's when everything changed. She showed up at my fence line in white jeans, wedge sandals, and an expression like she just licked battery acid. "I'm here about the structure," she said, waving vaguely at the ridge, though the dam wasn't even visible from where she stood. I explained politely that I wasn't part of Oak Hills Estates, that I didn't pay HOA dues, and that the structure she was referring to was fully permitted by 3 different government agencies. "Well, it's not in harmony with the visual aesthetic of our community," she replied. I blinked. "You can't see it." "That's not the point," she said. And right there I knew she'd made me a target. Over the next month, it escalated. Flyers showed up in mailboxes warning of the unauthorized reservoir on private land. HOA meetings suddenly included items like hydrological concerns and shadow structures. I was accused of building a pond to breed mosquitoes. Someone spray-painted "Damn Menace" on my mailbox. But I didn't flinch. I tightened the gate lock. I reinforced the spillway. And I documented everything. Because when people feel powerless, they lash out. And HOAs, they lash with paper, fines, notices, threats. But this was something else. This morning, they didn't use paper. They used steel. And they have no idea what they've unleashed. You don't really know your enemy until they start smiling to your face. After the incident at the fence line, her term, not mine, Karen changed tactics. No more sour expressions and thinly veiled threats. No, now she brought cookies. Store-bought oatmeal raisin that tasted like passive aggression and artificial vanilla. She said she just wanted to have a constructive dialogue about hydrological aesthetics. I invited her in, politely declined the cookies. My kitchen table was covered in topographic maps and slope calculations. She looked at them the way most people look at tax forms. Suspicion, confusion, and a sense that something illegal was happening. I just don't understand why you felt the need to build it, she said, perching awkwardly on the edge of a chair, not even bothering to hide the way she wiped it with a sanitizing wipe before sitting. Because without it, I said, your living room would have turned into a koi pond 3 times by now. She blinked. I don't recall flooding being a problem. You moved here last year. The dam's been up for almost 3. Pause. I just think water wants to move freely. What you've done, she gestured toward the ridgeline outside, interrupts the natural order. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. So does a house. So does a road. So does your vinyl fence with the solar-powered fairy lights. She didn't like that. Her mouth snapped shut like a mousetrap. A week later, I got my first notice of visual disruption. It accused me of maintaining a structure that disrupted the environmental continuity of Oak Hills Estates. I sent back a letter with a copy of my land deed, a highlighted note saying I wasn't part of Oak Hills Estates, and a post-it that read, "Visual continuity is not a legal term. Please consult a dictionary." They did not like that either. It escalated. By month's end, I'd received no less than 17 violations, not one from a government body, all from the HOA. They included unsanctioned water retention on unregulated terrain, unauthorized topographical modification, hydrological ambiguity, and my personal favorite, threat to HOA drainage identity. They fined me $300 for that last one. I framed it. Then came the letters. Karen sent certified notices addressed in cursive script that looked like it belonged on a wedding invitation. Inside were threats to report me to County Code Enforcement, the Department of Environmental Quality, FEMA. She CC'd all of them. I CC'd them back, with scans of every permit, every diagram, every stamped approval. I even included a nice little drone shot of the dam in action, just for flair. No one from the agencies responded, because there was nothing illegal happening, but that didn't stop the HOA. Soon after, the flyers started. They were printed in Comic Sans on neon yellow paper, slipped into every mailbox in Oak Hills Estates. Warning, unauthorized water retention system on private property. Shadow dam discovered. Built without community approval. No oversight. Could collapse at any time. Is your home in the flood path? Ask the board. They made it sound like I was constructing a nuclear reactor, not a modest earthen dam with drainage pipes and a safety spillway. People began looking at me differently, whispering when I walked into the hardware store. Parents called their kids back when I passed. Someone egged my truck. Once. That was a mistake. I installed trail cams the next morning. Then came the showdown. Karen called an emergency HOA meeting. Residents crammed into the community rec hall, folding chairs squeaking, styrofoam coffee cups in hand. I hadn't been invited. Naturally, I showed up. She was already speaking when I walked in. A dangerous precedent, she was saying, pacing in front of a trifold presentation board like a low-rent TED Talk. Private infrastructure with public consequences. This is not how communities thrive. She saw me, paused, then smiled. I'm so glad Mr. Allen could join us, she purred. Perhaps he'd like to explain why he felt it was acceptable to alter the local watershed without consulting the board. I stood in the aisle. No mic needed. I didn't consult the board, I said, because the board has no authority over my land. Murmurs. Karen clasped her hands the way school principals do, right before suspending someone. But your actions affect us, she said sweetly. Water doesn't respect fences. And neither do bulldozers, I replied. The room froze. Her eyes narrowed. I beg your pardon. I stepped forward. Let's be real clear. This isn't about water. It's about control. You didn't know the dam existed until your hydrangeas stopped drowning, and instead of asking why, you assumed the worst. You made it a threat. It is a threat, she snapped. There is standing water above our community. That's not safe. Neither are your 1980s French drains, I said. But I don't go tearing up your culverts in the middle of the night. Gasps. One guy in the back choked on his coffee. Karen's jaw twitched. This meeting, she said icily, is for HOA members only. A voice spoke from the side. Vince, quiet guy, mortgage broker, lived on lot 9. He's not wrong, though. Karen blinked. Excuse me? Vince stood. We haven't had a real flood since he built the thing. I remember the year before. My whole garage got soaked. Last 2 years, dry. A few nods. Someone muttered, yeah, same here. Karen held up her hand. This is about unauthorized action. If we let him get away with this, what's next? Someone building a moat? A watchtower? Laughter. I tilted my head. Would the moat need permits? More laughter. Karen turned beet red. She slammed her folder shut. Meeting adjourned, she snapped, storming out. I thought that might be the end of it. That maybe, just maybe, logic had won the day. It hadn't. It had merely pissed her off. The next morning, the gate lock was cut. Camera 1 gone. Camera 2 smashed. Camera 3 dangling by wires. I knew the footage backups were safe, tucked in a metal box inside the sluice mechanism. I checked. Intact. But that didn't stop the cold rage crawling up my spine. They'd crossed the line, and I had the proof. I spent the afternoon uploading the clips to cloud storage. Then I called my lawyer. Her name was Sarah, and she had the temperament of a judge and the voice of a tired librarian. She reviewed the footage in silence, then sighed. Oh, Karen, she said softly, shaking her head. You've made it personal. Because here's the truth about HOAs. They thrive on compliance, not confrontation. They expect you to roll over, to pay the fine, trim the hedge, repaint the fence. They do not expect you to fight back with a hard drive full of timestamps and hydrology permits. But I was done playing nice. Next stop, county offices. Because if they wanted a war, I was going to bring it. With facts, with evidence, and with the full force of every agency they thought I hadn't called yet. It started with a wedding invitation. My cousin Mel was getting married in Montana. Rustic barn, whiskey barrels, fairy lights. The whole Pinterest fantasy. I almost didn't go. Something felt off. You ever get that itch on the back of your neck? Like the air's too still, like something's watching? I ignored it. I shouldn't have. I left on a Friday morning. Before pulling out, I walked the dam one more time, checked the gravel along the retaining wall, cleared the spillway intake, tightened the sluice gate, posted a laminated sign at the trailhead that read, private property, structure monitored by cameras, no trespassing. Then I locked the gate with a chain I'd welded shut. It would take bolt cutters to get through. Spoiler, that's exactly what they used. When I got back Sunday night, everything was wrong. You know that feeling when you walk into your house and immediately know someone's been inside? It was like that, except it wasn't my home that had been violated. It was the land. I didn't even make it all the way to the ridge before my boots began to sink. Not deep, but just enough to notice the soft churn of recently disturbed earth. I crested the hill, and then I saw it, or rather didn't. No dam, no stonework, no sluice gate. No fencing, just a ragged scar in the ground where 3 years of blood, sweat, and civil engineering had once stood. It was like looking at the remains of a dream, smashed and soaked, bits of rebar poking out of the mud like ribs in a grave. A broken piece of the sluice handle stuck out of the ground like a tombstone. Tire tracks led back down toward Oak Hills Estates. Not regular tires. Wide tires. Construction vehicle wide. I followed them a few paces until something bright caught my eye. A laminated sign. Of course it was laminated. Stapled to a cheap wood stake, flapping in the wind like a low-budget grave marker. It read, "Removal of unauthorized structure, pursuant to HOA, Section 8.3, Oak Hills Estates, Board approved, action no date, no signature." Just that cursed HOA letterhead. It felt unreal. Like a nightmare written in legalese. I didn't yell, didn't scream, didn't throw anything. I just turned and walked, straight to the first trail cam. Gone. Tree trunk scraped where the mount had been ripped out. Second cam? Lens shattered, wires hanging. Third, crushed under a rock. But the memory card was still intact. But I wasn't worried, because I had redundancy. Inside the dam's control box, which by some miracle hadn't been completely obliterated, was a weather-sealed flash recorder. My backup for the backup. I unscrewed the panel with numb fingers, pulled out the drive, and went home. I uploaded the footage, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The camera feed flickered to life. It was time-stamped 11:14 a.m. Saturday. Two men in orange vests walk into frame. No company logos, just generic safety vests and bolt cutters. They cut the lock. 10 seconds later, a rented skid steer rumbles into view. And behind it, standing tall, smug, and oblivious to the camera angle, was Karen. I paused the footage. There she was, sunglasses perched on her head, HOA badge hanging around her neck like she was deputized by God. Starbucks cup in hand, barking orders. "Clear it all," she said. "This place is an eyesore." The operator hesitated. If he wanted a damn pond, he should have asked us first. I showed the footage to Sarah, my attorney, the next morning. She nearly dropped her coffee. "This," she said slowly, "is not just trespassing." I raised an eyebrow. "This is destruction of permitted infrastructure during an active flood season. We're talking environmental code violations, property damage, and maybe even criminal liability if we play it right." I leaned back, heart still hammering. "You think it's enough?" She smirked. "Oh, I think they just demolished their own defense." We didn't go to the police. Not yet. We went higher. First, we filed a report with the county's Water Management Division. I handed them a drive full of footage, copies of all the original permits, and a fresh survey showing the destroyed earthworks. Then we contacted floodplain oversight. The county was already tracking precipitation buildup from a stalled cold front sitting over the valley. We knew the forecast. We knew what was coming. They didn't. 3 days later, the drizzle began. By day 2, my gravel path had turned to slush. By day 4, I could feel the earth groaning. Water pulled in low spots the dam would have absorbed. Without the retention basin, every drop funneled down the ridge like a loaded gun pointed straight at Oak Hills Estates. I tried to warn them. Emailed the HOA. No reply. Left a certified letter. No response. Even Vince. Lot 9. Vince said they'd gone radio silent since the footage leaked to a few concerned residents. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. The kind that comes right before a scream. On the 6th night at exactly 2:37 a.m., I woke to a sound I'll never forget. A crack. Deep. Wet. Final. I threw on boots, grabbed a flashlight, and ran. The overlook was soaked, mud sliding underfoot, and through the beam of my light I saw it. Water. Not pooling. Charging. A brown, roaring torrent barreling down the hill like a stampede of angry bulls. It slammed into the retaining wall behind Karen's cul-de-sac with a sound like thunder cracking a rib cage. The wall buckled, split, fell. Water surged through her backyard, turned the koi pond into a mud pit, and lifted patio chairs like bathtub toys. Down below, the street disappeared. Trash bins floated like parade floats in a river of mulch, silt, and shattered landscaping. And at the front of it all, half buried in the sludge, floated one of Karen's neon flyers. Unauthorized structure. The irony could have drowned us all. I filmed everything. The breach, the mudslide, the cars half submerged, the neighbors screaming into the wind, and I made sure to film the for sale sign floating down the road like a ghost ship. By sunrise, emergency services had arrived. Firefighters in rafts, police rerouting traffic, neighbors in bathrobes crying into each other's arms. Karen stood in the middle of her ruined lawn, pink bathrobe soaked, mascara streaked, holding her phone like it might turn back time. Our eyes met across the water. She looked like someone who had just realized she'd picked the wrong enemy. I waved. She didn't wave back. The storm lasted 7 days, not drizzle, not polite, romantic rain tapping on windows. This was wrath, the kind of rain that makes old dogs hide under porches and grown men pray for backup generators. A collision of systems, Gulf moisture meeting a stalled Arctic front, turned our valley into a pressure cooker of water and wind, and the dam was no longer there to take the hit. By the second day, the ground had given up. Soil that had once absorbed gallons now turned sponge-like, bloated and heavy. Water ran in rivulets down the ridge, carving new paths, filling voids, pooling in trenches that weren't supposed to exist. Every morning, I walked the ridgeline with a clipboard. I took readings, logged flow rates, snapped photos. Not because I could stop it, I couldn't, but because I knew what was coming and someone had to bear witness. Down below, Oak Hills Estates was still pretending it could out-organize gravity. Sandbags lined driveways like dominoes. Sump pumps groaned under porches. Karen sent out an emergency bulletin titled, "How to Stay Safe and Dry During Challenging Times." It included helpful tips like use towels and contact your board liaison. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I kept filming. On day 5, the first basement failed. Lot 17, a nice couple with 2 kids. Water came through the floor vents like a reversed waterfall. They evacuated in the middle of the night. By morning, 3 more homes had flooded. And then came the mold. You can smell it before you see it. That sickly sweet rot that clings to everything. Walls, insulation, skin. People started asking questions. Why now? Why so bad? Why did the flood stop for 2 years and then suddenly come back? Quiet Vince from Lot 9, knocked on my door with a USB drive. "They're blaming you," he said. The file was a PDF, a formal complaint sent to the county by the HOA. Subject line, unauthorized removal of stormwater retention system by private individual. The document accused me of dismantling the dam, my own dam, without notification or coordination, resulting in catastrophic downstream flooding and structural harm to community assets. I read it 3 times. Then I laughed so hard I had to sit down. "They destroyed it," I muttered, "on camera, with bolt cutters and a bobcat. And now they're saying I took it down?" Vince winced. "They're panicking. Insurance is asking questions. People are pissed." Good. That afternoon, someone new showed up at my door. Yellow boots, clipboard, no HOA badge. County emergency manager. "Mr. Allen," she asked, pushing her wet hair from her face. "You the property owner of parcel 83B? I nodded. She stepped inside and looked at the wall where I'd posted every permit, blueprint, and inspection report like some conspiracy theorist of hydrology. "I've been briefed on the situation," she said. "I'd like to see everything." So I showed her. The videos, the maps. The footage of Karen sipping coffee while illegal demolition occurred. The before and after drone shots, the rainfall data, the hydrograph overlays, the lawsuit papers. She didn't say much, just took notes. Lots of them. Finally, she snapped her notebook shut. "This runoff event," she said, "has triggered a provisional reclassification of the entire floodplain zone." What does that mean? It means Oak Hills is now considered high risk. Insurance premiums will spike. Infrastructure retrofits will be mandated. Environmental remediation will be required. It's going to cost a lot of people a lot of money. I tilted my head. "And liability?" She nodded. "That's next." Within 48 hours, the story flipped. Karen sent out a message on Nextdoor, claiming I was a reckless amateur hydrologist who removed the dam for personal reasons. I posted the video, just a 25-second clip, her voice crystal clear. "Clear it all. This place is an eyesore." It went semi-viral, shared across the HOA Facebook page, posted in group chats. One neighbor set it to classical music and re-uploaded it as HOA Symphony and Stupid, Opus 1. Ah, they tried to claim the video was doctored. I dropped the full time-stamped trail cam footage. Silence, then panic. Emergency HOA meetings turned into shouting matches. Residents demanded to know who authorized the demolition. Karen pointed fingers. At Richard, at board procedures, at confusing language in the bylaws. No one was buying it. 6 houses were uninhabitable. 2 families were relocated to motels. Mold remediation trucks lined the streets like an invasion. Insurance adjusters circled the neighborhood like buzzards. And every homeowner knew this didn't have to happen. 9 days after the flood, I got a letter. Gold embossed, certified. The HOA was suing me. The claims were absurd. Gross negligence. Unauthorized landform modification. Intentional disruption of stormwater equilibrium. They were accusing me of taking down the dam that they had illegally demolished. I handed the letter to Sarah. She read it, chuckled. This, she said, is the dumbest move they could have made. We filed a countersuit within 72 hours. Trespassing, destruction of permitted infrastructure, violation of floodplain regulations, malicious property damage. We subpoenaed the landscaping crew, Craigslist hires with no credentials, and every single board member who had signed off on the removal. We attached the video evidence, the permits, the rainfall data, the damage assessments, and then we waited. But we didn't have to wait long, because the county made their own announcement. In a 14-page report released to the public, they concluded, the removal of the privately permitted stormwater retention structure significantly increased the severity of flooding experienced in the Oak Hills Estates residential zone. In plainer terms, the dam worked, and removing it caused the flood. That one paragraph set off a firestorm. Residents revolted. A petition to remove the entire HOA board gathered 83 signatures in one day. Vince organized a town hall in the high school gym. Karen showed up with a binder. She left to a chorus of booing. We dressed like we were going to a funeral. Black suit, gray tie, no emotion. Not because we were grieving, but because they were. They just didn't know it yet. The courtroom was modest, county level, fluorescent lights, linoleum floor, wooden benches with gum stuck under them. But what it lacked in drama, it made up for in consequences. And the judge? The Honorable Judith Marlin. No nonsense, former environmental prosecutor. Known for one thing. If you come into my courtroom with weak logic, bring snacks. You'll be here a while. Perfect. Their side went first. The HOA's attorney, a sharp-suited man with a nervous tic, opened with what he probably thought was righteous thunder. Your Honor, this is a case of reckless disregard. A landowner took it upon himself to construct and later dismantle an unregulated stormwater retention structure, which endangered the lives and properties of every family in Oak Hills Estates. He pointed to a satellite image of the ridge, taken 2 days after they bulldozed the dam. No dam visible, assures his proof. Sarah leaned toward me and whispered, he just played himself. When our turn came, Sarah stood like she had all the time in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just heard is a story. A dramatic one, but not a true one. She clicked the remote. Drone footage filled the screen. The dam, fully intact, just days before the demolition. Then came the footage from the trail cams, the bobcat arriving, the bolt cutters, Karen's voice. Clear it all. This place is an eyesore. Gasps echoed in the courtroom. Sarah let the silence hang, then passed around copies of my permits, each page stamped, dated, signed. Then she called our star witness, the contractor. He took the stand wearing a wrinkled polo and nervous eyes. Sarah, did you receive written authorization from the landowner to perform demolition? Contractor, no, ma'am. Sarah, were you informed the structure was permitted? Contractor, I wasn't told anything. I just thought it was a rock wall or something. Sarah, who hired you? Contractor, the lady with the badge. He nodded toward Karen. Sarah, did you ask whether it was legal? Contractor, yeah, I said it seemed risky. She told me, He looked down. Sarah, please repeat it for the court. He sighed. She said, "The whole neighborhood's on our side. He's just some loner with a hill and a grudge." The courtroom fell completely silent. Karen turned pale. One of the board members audibly muttered, "Oh my God." Sarah turned back to the judge. "No further questions." The final blow came when we introduced a document from the HOA's own meeting minutes, leaked by an anonymous resident. It included a single line, "Take care of the dam while he's gone." No one could argue intent after that. When the judge returned with her ruling 2 weeks later, her voice was calm, almost bored, as she delivered the verbal equivalent of a tactical nuke. The court finds the HOA's claim to be without merit, lacking evidence, and motivated by a pattern of malicious interference. The plaintiff's suit is dismissed in full. Regarding the counterclaim, this court finds the defendants liable on 4 counts: unauthorized demolition of a permitted structure, willful property damage, violation of environmental code, and negligent contribution to municipal flooding. The room was dead quiet until she added, "Damages are awarded to Mr. Allen in the amount of $170,000 for structural loss, $620,000 for environmental remediation, $130,000 for legal expenses, and $500,000 in punitive damages. Total, $3. 12 million. I didn't smile. I just looked at Karen, now slumped, eyes hollow, and gave her a small, respectful nod. No gloating, just recognition that she had tried to control nature and lost. A week later, the HOA imploded. Karen was removed as president. 3 board members resigned. The HOA's insurance refused to cover the payout, citing malicious, unauthorized actions. And me, I had my check. But that wasn't the win. The win came when Vince and the neighbors showed up. Not with pitchforks, but with shovels, to rebuild the dam, together. It didn't end with a bang. No gavel slam, no applause, no dramatic gasp in a courtroom, just a letter. A 1-page notice from the county registrar's office. The Oak Hills Estates Homeowners Association is hereby declared administratively dissolved due to fiscal insolvency and procedural negligence. In plain English, the HOA was dead. But justice doesn't just stop when the charter folds. The fines didn't disappear with the laminated notices. The court had ruled the board members personally liable for the damages not covered by their now-defunct insurance. That meant Karen, and Richard, and 2 others who signed off on the demolition. Their names were on the documents. Their hands were on the wrecking bar. Karen appealed twice, lost both. By the time it was over, she had mortgaged her home, sold her BMW, and drained her savings to cover her share of the $3.1 million judgment. It wasn't enough. A month after the final ruling, a bright orange "Motivated Seller As Is" sign appeared on her lawn. Not the classy kind, the desperate kind, the kind that screams, "Please just take it." Rumor has it, she took a job in some planned community outside Tulsa. She now moderates a Facebook group called HOA Free Living, Reclaim Your Lawn, and posts daily complaints about squirrels and non-compliant trash bins. Some say she learned her lesson. Others say the squirrels are winning. As for me, I didn't cash the check right away. I stood on that ridge for 3 mornings in a row, coffee in hand, staring at the scar where the dam once stood. And then I got to work. But this time, I wasn't alone. It started with Vince. He showed up one Saturday morning with work gloves and a 5-gallon bucket of gravel. Didn't say anything. Just nodded and started reinforcing the first layer of stone. Then came Martha from Lot 12. She'd lost her herb garden to the flood, brought sandwiches and a level. Then the Martinez twins, teenagers who used to throw rocks at my mailbox, carried rebar up the slope like it was a cross to bear. No one talked about the lawsuit, not out loud. But every hammer strike, every sandbag laid, every wheelbarrow filled was an apology written in labor, and I accepted. We rebuilt the dam in 5 weeks, faster, stronger, more elegant than before. Triple reinforced earth wall, retaining stone with interlocking baffles, new gated spillway with an automated sensor system powered by a small solar array. We even planted willow trees around the basin to help absorb runoff and reinforce the soil. It wasn't just engineering, it was art, it was healing. On the final day of construction, the sun came out for the first time in 2 weeks. The clouds broke open like a blessing. The entire valley glowed. The creek trickled through the new channel, soft and rhythmic, like the land itself was exhaling. We stood there in silence, not a crowd, not a ceremony, just neighbors, finally neighbors. A few days later, I installed the plaque. Simple aluminum, weatherproofed, screwed into a solid oak post at the edge of the spillway. Bold letters etched in black. Next time, ask the guy who understands gravity. Underneath, in smaller font, County Permit, Nugger 4821B drainage capacity, 172,000 gal restored, together. Now, when it rains, no one panics. They walk their dogs, they wave. They nod at the dam like it's part of the landscape. Permanent, trusted, quiet. Even the holdouts, the ones who never said sorry, now walk their routes a little slower, like they understand something they didn't before. Not just about runoff, about responsibility. Sometimes people ask me if I'm proud of what happened, if I feel like I won. The truth? I didn't build that dam to prove anything. I built it because I understand water. It doesn't care about bylaws or titles or laminated threats. It just follows the path of least resistance. It does what it's meant to do, and so do I. The final irony? The county reclassified my land as an environmental buffer zone, legally untouchable. No HOA jurisdiction, no zoning board reviews, no hydrangea violations. Just soil, stone, sky, and peace. There's a quiet kind of justice in that, the kind that doesn't need headlines, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that stands year after year through storm and sun and whispers, "You tried to control the water. You forgot who built the dam. He just hit my son with a golf club." That's what I screamed across the green, just seconds after my 17-year-old collapsed to the ground, blood pouring down his face. And standing at the edge of it all, the queen of the HOA, Karen Whitaker, arms folded, sunglasses on, smirking. She didn't flinch. She didn't call for help. She watched. And what she didn't know was, I trained federal agents for situations worse than this. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I picked up my own club, and I shattered his knee, right there, in front of her. If you've ever wanted to fight back against an HOA tyrant, this story is your rally cry. Welcome to HOA Karen Files, where justice swings back. Let me show you how one crooked nod from a Karen unraveled her entire empire, one swing at a time. HOA's attack dog. Hurt my son so I broke his knee in front of everyone. Glenwood Ridge. That place will chew you up, son. That was the first thing I thought, but not the first thing I said. Because when my boy jogged up the driveway with that hopeful grin and a practice wedge slung over his shoulder, I couldn't bring myself to crush it. He was 17. Clean swing, clean heart, and more fire in his gut than most men twice his age. His name was Eli, and golf was more than a game to him. It was his sanctuary. So when I found the envelope in our dusty old mailbox, I almost tossed it with the rest of the HOA flyers. Gold-trimmed, thick paper, and the Glenwood Ridge HOA seal, stamped like it was a royal decree. No name, no contact, just a single typed line. To the promising young athlete, Eli Carpenter. You are cordially invited to showcase your golf skills at the grand opening of Glenwood Ridge's prestige course. Then a date, a time, and a warning. Attire strictly HOA standard. Guests by escort only. It was signed only by a title. Office of the Chairwoman, HOA Executive Committee. I stood there on the porch staring at that letter as Eli trotted up. "What's that, Dad?" I showed him. He blinked. "Glenwood Ridge? Are you serious? That's the elite course. The one that doesn't even let local pros book a tee time without a blood sample. Apparently, you're on their radar now," I muttered. He looked like he couldn't believe it. And maybe he couldn't. Honestly, neither could I. Glenwood Ridge didn't do charity, and they sure as hell didn't do kindness. But Eli's eyes lit up like a kid who just found out Santa was real, and I knew there was no saying no. I was a father first, a realist second. So I swallowed the unease coiled in my gut and clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Let's go make an impression," I said. He grinned. But as we drove toward that gate a few days later, I couldn't shake one thing. Glenwood Ridge wasn't inviting us. They were setting the stage. And someone, somewhere, was holding the script. Someone named Karen. They say a lion doesn't snarl before it pounces. Karen Whitaker didn't raise her voice. She didn't glare. She didn't even fake a smile. She just looked. From the top of the clubhouse steps, framed by columns and cut stone grandeur, she stood like a monarch surveying her domain. Blazer the color of dry blood, hair sculpted into a platinum helmet, heels sharp enough to scar concrete. And flanking her like obedient hounds were two board members in pastel polos, sunglasses, and tight jawlines. My son and I had just stepped out of our truck, dusty, 15 years old, proudly American-made, and already we didn't belong. The Glenwood Ridge air was different, not just the crisp scent of over-fertilized turf and lavender hedges, but the way people carried themselves, like they were allergic to poverty, or worse, humility. Eli's shoulders were square, but I saw it in his jaw, that flicker of self-doubt. The way his fingers nervously tapped the edge of his golf bag, like he was trying to remind himself he did deserve to be here. And he did. I'd made sure of that. But Karen? Karen didn't think so. She whispered something to the man beside her. He was tall, thick-necked, arms like cinder blocks under that pale blue polo. He smirked, not openly, just a twitch of the lip, like something sour sat on his tongue, and he liked the taste of it. That was the first move. Not a word, not a welcome, just a look, a whisper, a smirk. We were directed, not invited, to park near the service lot. Gravel, dumpster smell. A world away from the circular driveway lined with Teslas and Porsches, where real guests were allowed to step out like royalty. The valet didn't even hide the sneer when he took one glance at our plates. "You here for the junior showcase?" he asked, eyes on the bird poop on our hood. "We're here by invitation," I replied, calm and even. He shrugged, already turning away. Eli and I walked the path ourselves through the side entrance, past the staff-only signs and maintenance carts. And there, on the perfectly edged patio of the clubhouse, we met her, officially, for the first time. Karen Whitaker didn't shake hands. Instead, she clasped hers in front of her waist like she was posing for a portrait and nodded once. "Mr. Carpenter," she said, each syllable clipped like she was biting them off with her teeth. "We pride ourselves on welcoming new faces into our community. This showcase is about excellence, exposure, and, most importantly, standards." Her eyes flicked to Eli. "Your son, I hope, understands that he's not just representing himself today." I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't touch the eyes. "He's here because you invited him." Her lips twitched, just a fraction. But in that fraction lived 1,000 unspoken threats. She turned to Eli. "Be mindful of proximity. The prestige circle is for members only." Then she gestured vaguely toward the far edge of the course. "You may warm up over there." Like we were being assigned a kennel. As we walked, Eli didn't say much, but I saw the way his fingers clenched and unclenched around his glove. He wasn't a kid who got rattled easy, but Glenwood Ridge was different. It didn't bark. It whispered, and it had teeth. "She talks like that to all guests," he muttered. "No," I said. "Only the ones she's scared of." He glanced at me, confused. "Scared? Of me?" I didn't answer. Not yet. But I knew what Karen feared. Not Eli. Not me. The idea that someone could step onto her turf and not need her permission, that was the real threat. At the far green, Eli started warming up. His swing was smooth, controlled, like water through silk. I'd seen it 1,000 times, but watching him here, on this pristine course, with strangers and loafers pausing mid-conversation to glance over, it hit different. By the third shot, a hush was starting to gather. By the fifth, someone clapped. It wasn't a loud clap, just one. But in a place like Glenwood Ridge, one clap might as well be a protest. Phones started coming out, discreetly. But not secretly. Karen, still stationed on her balcony perch, noticed. She stiffened. Then she leaned in, whispered, to him. I would later learn his name. Chase Donovan, HOA, head of training, whatever that meant. To me, he looked like a college linebacker who peaked at 23 and never emotionally recovered. His golf shirt was too tight, his watch too expensive, and his smile too wide to be trustworthy. He made his move like a man sent to do a job, swaggered across the green like he owned it, got too close to Eli. I stood. Back off, Chase, I called. He doesn't need a caddy. He turned, smile glued in place. Just giving some encouragement. He had a club in his hand. And then, it happened. The sound was wrong. Not the thwack of driver on ball, not the hiss of turf. A crack, sickening, wet, sudden. The kind of sound you hear in accidents. Car crashes, street fights, fractures. Eli collapsed. Blood bloomed across his temple like spilled ink. I was already running before the scream started. The club in Chase's hand was still raised, and then dropped like nothing had happened. Karen descended slowly, like a queen surveying the aftermath of a rebellion. She didn't shout, didn't ask if Eli was okay. She said, "Oh dear, I did warn you this course isn't safe for amateurs." My blood froze. She'd watched it happen. She'd let it happen. I turned to her. "You let him swing." She shrugged. "Boys' roughhouse. Accidents happen." My son was bleeding on the grass, and Karen Whitaker was bored. You ever feel something inside you shift? Not break, not snap, just realign, like a weight shifting from one side of a seesaw to the other? That's what happened. I didn't scream, didn't threaten. I stood, walked toward the club rack. My hands were steady, my heart wasn't, but my purpose was. When I returned, 7-iron in hand, Chase was laughing. "Kid's got a soft skull," he muttered to someone. "Didn't think I tapped him that hard." Then he saw me. Hey man, don't get dramatic. It was just crack. Steel met bone. His knee folded sideways with a sound I'll never forget. And for the first time, Karen screamed. "You've lost your mind," she shrieked. I didn't answer. I dropped the club, pulled out my badge. State-certified law enforcement trainer, retired, federal oversight consultant, active. Her face turned to ash. That was the moment the room, the country club, the HOA, the illusion, cracked. Phones were out, cameras rolling. People weren't whispering anymore. They were watching, and Karen, for the first time, she didn't have a script. The club hit the grass with a dull metallic thud. Karen stood frozen. One hand clutched the railing of the clubhouse steps. The other pointed at me like she still believed she could command something. Authority, attention, fear. But no one moved. Not the valet behind her, not the board members to her left, and certainly not Chase, who now lay screaming on the green, writhing like a deer hit by a truck. People stared, not at me, at her. "You're going to be arrested," she shouted, mascara already smudging beneath her sunglasses. "You assaulted a staff member on HOA property." I turned toward her. "I know exactly what I just did," I said, voice flat. "And so does everyone here." Gasps, whispers, phones raised. A dozen tiny cameras blinking like judgmental fireflies. Karen spun, trying to rally support. "These people," she gestured wildly at the guests, "they respect order. They respect leadership. What happened today was an act of madness." But no one answered. No one clapped. One man, elderly, quiet, leaned toward his wife and whispered, just loud enough to be heard, "We saw the boy go down first." Karen's jaw locked. Her heel twisted against the turf like she was grinding out an insult. And then I stepped forward. "You've manipulated this community for years," I said, my voice low but slicing. "You fine veterans for their flags. You threaten children for lemonade stands. You bully single mothers over mailbox paint. And today you watched a man swing a club at a teenage boy. You didn't stop it. You smiled." "That is slander," she spat. "No," I replied, "that's truth. And it's all on video." A woman by the champagne tent raised her phone higher. Got the whole thing, she called out. From her little nod to the swing, Karen's face paled, the kind of pale you don't recover from with bronzer. She turned to the board, her loyal crew. They were already stepping back, not saying a word, not defending her. Even Mrs. Hollins, her treasurer, her lapdog, her enforcer, was looking away. Karen's kingdom was cracking, and it wasn't from a speech. It was from truth. Chase was moaning now, hands still on his knee, swearing between sobs. A guest, an off-duty EMT, crouched beside him, eyes grim. "Kneecap's done," he murmured. "He's finished. Long rehab if he walks right again." He said it loud enough for Karen to hear. She winced, but I didn't flinch. I stepped onto the exact patch of turf where Eli had bled. Grass still stained, dirt still torn, and I said it again. "You watched. You let it happen." "I didn't order him to do anything," she snapped. "That man acted on his own." You nodded. "It meant nothing." "Then why does the whole crowd know exactly what it meant?" Her silence was louder than a confession. The HOA president had no more script to follow. She tried to pivot, always her fallback. "This community thrives because of rules, discipline, structure. Without it, we're chaos." "You hear that?" I asked the crowd. She just admitted it. Her version of order is fear. Her version of rules is watching children bleed and doing nothing. The wind picked up, and with it, something else. Murmurs, voices, stories. A woman near the back raised her hand. "She fined me $300 because my son's bike tire was 5 inches over the line in the driveway." Another joined in. "She banned my daughter from the community center, said her shirt showed too much shoulder. She's 12. Then came more, and more, like floodgates opening. Karen spun, trying to outpace the collapse. "This is a witch hunt," she shouted. "Ungrateful, disloyal." I stepped beside her, not threatening, just present, and said the quiet part out loud. "Leadership isn't fear. It isn't control. And it sure as hell isn't smiling while a teenage boy lies broken in the grass." She turned to the HOA board again. They didn't meet her eyes. Even the bartender behind her, the one who'd handed her champagne 15 minutes ago, was now standing stone still, gripping the bottle like he wasn't sure who she was anymore. Karen tried to speak again, but no one was listening. People weren't facing me anymore. They were facing her, and the silence wasn't respect. It was the beginning of rejection. I took a deep breath, let it settle in my ribs, then raised my voice, not shouting, just loud enough for the truth to reach the back row. "This isn't about golf. This is about what happens when one person abuses power and no one stops them. Well, today that power snapped." A pause, then one clap, then another, then dozens. Karen didn't fall, but she staggered. In that moment, mascara running, hair undone, blazer wrinkled. She didn't look like a queen. She looked like a woman terrified of being seen without her crown. She turned, desperate now, toward Chase. He looked up from the grass, begging her with his eyes. She didn't even look back. That was all you needed to know. He was her weapon, not her concern. Security arrived then. Not HOA staff. Real security. Hired by the course, summoned by guests. They didn't ask questions, just cleared a path. One of them whispered something in Karen's ear. She shook her head, furious. But she stepped away. Finally, the retreat of the tyrant. I knelt beside Eli. He was conscious now, barely. The EMT was wrapping gauze, checking his pupils. "He'll be okay," she said softly. "But he's going to need rest, and you're going to need legal backup." I smiled. "Already working on it." I stood, pulled out my phone, and started calling. My lawyer, the police, the press. By sunset, Sausage or Justice for Eli was trending. The footage was everywhere. Her nod, Chase's swing, my retaliation, her cold reaction, the crowd turning. Glenwood Ridge had tried to script the perfect event, but instead they got a revolution. Karen tried to spin it. She told local news Chase acted alone, that Eli had been too aggressive, that I had overreacted. But the footage didn't lie, and neither did the crowd. The HOA's insurance company caught wind of the liability and moved faster than Karen could hire a PR firm. They froze her access, suspended her pending investigation, locked her out of the system she'd ruled for years. And just like that, her empire cracked. The next morning, the gates of Glenwood Ridge didn't open as slowly. They creaked, not physically, no rust on those digital mechanisms, but symbolically. The kind of creak that comes from a system not built to withstand what it just went through. For years, Karen Whitaker had controlled Glenwood Ridge like a monarch with a spreadsheet. Her laws weren't written in kindness. They were chiseled in fear. She ruled through citations, whispers, and cold perfection. And it worked, until it didn't. Until someone bled, until someone fought back, until the footage went viral. By mid-morning, 3 different local stations had called me. 2 asked for interviews. 1 just wanted to confirm it was real. I didn't need to convince them. The video spoke for itself. Karen's nod, Chase's swing, Eli collapsing, me walking calmly toward the club rack. The swing, the break, the silence. The internet has a strange way of deciding justice sometimes. It doesn't wait for courtrooms. It doesn't need depositions. It just knows. And Glenwood Ridge had become Exhibit A in a nationwide conversation about HOAs, about abuse of power, about what happens when the wrong people are handed authority with no oversight. By 10:47 a.m., Karen was officially suspended from all HOA activities, pending investigation. That was the official phrase. The unofficial phrase, she's done. Her key card, deactivated. Her email, locked. Her access to HOA funds, frozen. And worst of all for her, her status, gone. No more invitations, no more board votes, no more tight-lipped smiles from neighbors who feared her clipboard. I heard later that she tried to attend a community image meeting that afternoon. They wouldn't let her in. Security, real security, met her at the door and told her, plainly, "This isn't your meeting anymore." She stood there for 7 minutes, just outside in the sun, alone, then turned, got into her Escalade, and drove off without a word. At home, Eli was healing. His stitches were neat, his bandages clean, his pain manageable. But something deeper was shifting in him, in his posture, in his quiet. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted to be a symbol. He just wanted to play golf. But now he was more than an athlete. He was the kid who stood tall while power swung wildly and still didn't flinch. That night he turned to me. His voice was quiet. "Did I ruin everything?" I shook my head. "No, you exposed everything they tried to keep buried." I meant it. Meanwhile, Glenwood Ridge, or what was left of its old structure, was on fire. Not literally, but politically, it was ashes. More residents came forward. Emails surfaced, screenshots, citations that made no sense, stories that had never been spoken aloud before. One family fined $400 because their toddler's toy left on the porch was visually disruptive. Another woman threatened with eviction for painting her front door unapproved turquoise, a color 2 shades off from the HOA's palette. A veteran told how Karen had demanded he lower his flag during a non-holiday week. Each story by itself felt like a paper cut. Together, they formed a gaping wound. A week later, the board, now operating under interim leadership, called for a full community vote. Single issue, simple ballot. Should Karen Whitaker be permanently removed from her role as HOA president? 91% voted yes. The other 9%, I'd bet most of them were her remaining circle, or too afraid not to abstain. Karen never showed up to the vote. Instead, she submitted a 3-line resignation letter by courier. "I hereby resign my position. I take no responsibility for the incident in question. I caution Glenwood Ridge against turning governance into theater. No apology, no ownership, just bitterness, wrapped in legal disclaimers." She moved out that night. Black SUV, curtains drawn. No farewell, no ceremony, just silence. And yet in that silence, something better grew. For the first time, the people of Glenwood Ridge, neighbors who had smiled through gritted teeth, who had whispered instead of speaking, who had paid fines instead of pushing back, began to talk, openly, loudly, honestly. They told stories. They questioned systems. They asked why they'd ever tolerated someone like Karen in the first place. And then they started changing things. 2 weeks after the incident, I got another envelope in the mail. This one was hand-addressed. Inside was a card. We'd like to invite you and Eli back. This time, not as guests, but as family. Glenwood Ridge Interim Council. We returned, not through the side entrance, not to the gravel lot. No valet sneers. This time, we were met with applause. Eli didn't know what to do with it. He just stood there, stunned, as neighbors clapped and nodded and shook his hand. At the seventh hole, the one where it all happened, a small crowd had gathered. In the center, a bronze plaque. We walked up together. The plaque read, Eli Carpenter, not just a golfer, a reminder that silence is never safer than truth. Next to it, a white flag fluttered in the breeze. Not HOA branded, not corporate, just a single word embroidered in deep blue. Honor. Eli didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just stepped up, took a club from his bag, and hit one clean shot down the fairway. The ball soared, like the green itself had been waiting for that swing. And as I watched it fly, I realized something. Karen Whitaker had ruled with fear. But my son? He earned something she never could. Legacy, not from power, but from pain, from standing tall, from refusing to back down. You'd think it ended with the vote, with Karen gone, with Eli healed, with a plaque, a white flag, and a clean shot down the seventh fairway. But the truth is, stories like this, they don't end. They echo. Weeks passed. The news cycle moved on. From Glenwood Golf Gate to the next scandal, the next viral reckoning. But in Glenwood Ridge, things had changed. People who once peeked from behind curtains now spoke in daylight. Neighbors who feared fines now organized meetings. Teenagers walked freer, louder. Families left bikes in their front yards, unlocked. It wasn't just about Karen. It was about everything she stood on, and how easily it cracked when one person decided not to play along anymore. The footage of Chase's swing had millions of views now. But the moment that mattered most to me wasn't when I shattered his knee. It was when Eli stood up, blood running down his face, eyes steady. He didn't scream. He didn't retaliate. He stood. That's the message. That's the swing that mattered. There's something about silence, the kind that festers, in neighborhoods, in classrooms, in boardrooms, in families. It becomes habit, a survival instinct. We let things slide. We excuse. We say, that's just how she is, or don't rock the boat, or it's not worth the fight, until one day someone does fight, and suddenly we all remember what it feels like to breathe honestly. Karen Whitaker thought fear would keep her throne. What she didn't count on was that my son's blood would water something deeper, something real, community, courage, accountability. Eli never went back to Glenwood's junior program. He didn't need to. He had nothing left to prove to anyone, especially not them. Instead, he started coaching kids at a public course outside town, the kind without gates or dress codes or HOA committees hovering over tee times. He teaches them to swing, but more than that, he teaches them to stand. As for me, I still drive past Glenwood sometimes, just to see it. The place where fear once smiled behind clipboards. The place where a king's guard raised a club and a father raised something stronger. Let me ask you something. How many Karens do you know, not just in HOAs, but in life? Bosses who rule with threat. Relatives who use guilt like a scalpel. Officials who call silence order. People who smile when they know you can't fight back. Now ask yourself this. What if someone did? What if someone finally said, enough? Not with rage, not with revenge, but with truth sharp enough to break bone. That's what this story is really about. Not golf, not property lines, not even the bruise on my son's temple. It's about that moment we all carry when we know we've been pushed too far and we choose to stop kneeling, we choose to stand. So if you've ever been fined for speaking up, punished for not conforming, silenced for being honest, then let this story be your permission. You don't need a badge to be brave. You don't need a courtroom to demand justice. Sometimes, justice doesn't come with a gavel. Sometimes it comes with a 7-iron. Thank you for watching. If this story fired you up, made you clench your fists, or gave you a little more backbone than you had yesterday, smash that like button, share it with someone who's been pushed too long, and comment one word below, enough, because that's where change begins, with one word, one swing, one voice louder than silence. They stole my land and built a resort on it. You heard that right. 84 cabins on my family's ranch. While I was away serving in Washington, D.C., and when I came back, they pointed a gun at me and told me to leave. Welcome to HOA Karen Files, the channel that brings you real stories of HOA greed, neighbor nightmares, and the sweet sound of legal revenge. Hit subscribe and buckle up, because this war just got personal. HOA built 84 vacation cabins on my ranch and called me a trespasser. After 3 relentless years in Washington, where I worked 16-hour days drafting the Federal Land Access and Conservation Act, I finally came home. The bill had passed. My work, meticulous, technical, often thankless, was done. All I wanted was to breathe mountain air again, to feel the soil beneath my boots, to walk among the pines that had watched over my family for 3 generations. The Westbrook Ranch, 600 acres of forested hills and open fields nestled in Evergreen County, had been ours since the 1940s. My grandfather bought it with the kind of stubborn pride only a man raised in the Depression could understand. My father expanded it in the 1980s. I inherited it 5 years ago when they passed. Through all that time, it had remained untouched, sacred land, preserved with love, memory, and promise. But as I drove down the familiar dirt path leading up to the East Ridge, the same path I had ridden on horseback as a boy, I felt something was wrong. The road, once lined with wild shrubs and mossy fence posts, was now freshly paved. Streetlights stood at perfect intervals. I slowed the truck, narrowing my eyes. Then I saw it. Cabins, dozens of them. Rustic, yes, but modern. Too clean, too new. They stretched across land that used to be my family's hayfield. A place I remembered watching fireflies dance with my sister on warm summer nights. Now it looked like a resort brochure. I kept driving, disoriented, until a gate blocked my way. It was a large iron structure with an electronic scanner and a sign that read, Whispering Pines HOA, private property, residents, and guests only. A guard stepped out of a booth beside the gate, uniformed, armed. He looked at me with the kind of suspicion you reserve for trespassers, not landowners. Can I help you, sir? I leaned out the window. Yeah, I live here, or at least I used to. This is the Westbrook Ranch. My name's Max Westbrook. He didn't flinch. Sir, this is Whispering Pines Private Development. If you don't have a guest pass or proof of residence, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I stared at him, at the sign, at the cabins behind him. Something inside me shifted, a deep, slow burn that started in my chest and crawled toward my throat. You're saying I'm trespassing? On my own damn land? I'm saying you're not authorized to enter this property. Call the sheriff if you want to dispute that. So I did. Sheriff Tom Wilkins had been in office for 22 years. He was an old friend of my father, and he recognized me the moment I walked into his station. Max Westbrook? I thought you were still up in D.C. playing lawyer. I came home, I said, but apparently I don't own it anymore. He raised an eyebrow. I explained what I'd seen. The cabins, the gate, the guard who threatened to call him on me. Tom leaned back in his chair, frowning. That development's been going up for almost 2 years. Whispering Pines filed easement claims, got fast-tracked approval. Councilman Redfield signed off on it himself. I felt the blood drain from my face. Easement claims? They filed access rights over my land? He nodded. It's all in the county records. Says they were granted an access corridor and limited use development rights. He paused, suddenly wary. You didn't approve any of that? Tom, I said flatly, the man who supposedly granted those rights, my grandfather, has been dead for 20 years. He went quiet. I drove straight to the county clerk's office. It took some convincing, but the staff let me into the records archive. I found the documents easily. Too easily. They were new, filed just under 2 years ago. Signed, stamped, certified. I looked at the signature on the main easement approval form. It was shaky, off. The kind of signature you get when someone is trying to imitate another from memory. I pulled out my phone and took photos. Every page, every stamp, every falsified approval. Back at the ranch house, I sat in the dark for a long time. My father once told me, the law protects those who know how to wield it. He taught me that justice was rarely given. It was taken back with knowledge and patience and grit. I didn't know exactly what had happened yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Someone had stolen my land, and they were about to learn who they stole it from. The next morning, I was at the county courthouse before sunrise. Evergreen County's records office sat inside a squat, beige building that hadn't changed since my father's time. The interior smelled like dust, toner, ink, and stale coffee. The clerk on duty, Janice, was the same woman who used to sell raffle tickets at the county fair. She recognized me instantly. Max? Well, I'll be. You're back, she said, eyebrows raised. Didn't expect to see you digging through easement files on your first day home. Didn't expect to be fighting for my own land, I replied. With Tom Wilkins' verbal clearance, Janice let me behind the counter and into the archive room. I spent the better part of 6 hours combing through everything Whispering Pines HOA had filed with the county over the past 2 years. They had paperwork for everything: development permits, construction zoning changes, environmental impact statements, and, most damning of all, a sweeping easement agreement that gave them rights over nearly 40 acres of my property. The alleged signatory? My grandfather, in 2023. The man had passed away in 2002. He'd never used a computer, let alone DocuSign. The dates were all wrong, the font styles inconsistent, but the county had stamped them as valid. That told me two things. One, someone had forged those documents. Two, someone inside the county had either missed it or let it happen. I took copies of everything and drove straight to the old Westbrook Ranch house, still dusty and abandoned since my parents passed. I had kept the utilities running, the taxes paid, but I hadn't expected to return to a war zone. I made coffee, sat at the old oak table in the kitchen, and laid out the files. The picture was getting clearer. Whispering Pines wasn't just a rogue HOA, it was a front, likely for a developer. The speed, the coordination, the strategic location. It wasn't amateur hour. They were professionals, and they'd made a critical error. They didn't know whose land they'd stolen. The next step was obvious. I needed an ally. So I picked up the phone and called Olivia Carr, a former student of mine from my teaching stint at Georgetown Law. Smart, thorough, and fearless. She'd gone on to become a rising star in land rights litigation and had once successfully taken on a state agency for environmental negligence. I didn't have to explain much. The moment I mentioned forged easement and HOA takeover, she was already packing a bag. By the next day, Olivia was at the ranch with a duffel bag, a laptop, a stack of case law, and a fire in her eyes. Professor Westbrook, she said, stepping into the dusty foyer, I've waited years for a case like this. Call me Max, I said, and I think we're about to make some noise. Olivia and I went to work. We cataloged every signature, every permit, every approval. She mapped the property lines using satellite imagery in GIS software, cross-referencing with the county's own zoning database. By sundown, we'd found a dozen irregularities. Some of the survey data had been copied verbatim from a neighboring property. One set of signatures used a notary stamp registered to a woman who hadn't lived in Evergreen County since 2015. One of the parcel numbers listed in the permit didn't even exist. It was a patchwork of sloppy lies held together by bureaucratic laziness or corruption. That's not just negligence, Olivia said, tapping her screen. That's organized fraud. We suspected a connection with the county council. Olivia did some digging and found the link. Councilman Carl Redfield. Redfield had pushed through the Whispering Pines development proposal during a so-called expedited review session. No public notice, no resident input, just a rubber stamp and a signature. He was also the recipient of a generous campaign donation from a company called Blackridge Holdings, LLC. A little more research revealed that Blackridge owned the development rights to several properties surrounding my ranch. The same company also had ties to a local real estate magnate named Eleanor Quinn, a woman known for flipping rural land into luxury communities, often under the guise of eco-friendly development. Olivia leaned back in her chair. This is deeper than we thought. This isn't just a case of forged paperwork. This is a coordinated land grab. That night, I took a walk out to the ridge, the same ridge where, as a kid, I used to sit beside my dad and watch the sunset roll over the treetops. I remembered how he once told me, "Land doesn't lie, Max. People do. But the land, it remembers." And right now the land was calling out, calling for justice. I looked out at the cabins, rows of warm lights twinkling from porches that had no right to exist. Families were inside, sipping wine, watching TV, completely unaware they were living on stolen soil. And I didn't blame them. Not yet. They were pawns in someone else's game. But I knew one thing for sure. Eleanor Quinn had picked the wrong ranch. The next morning, I filed a formal claim of ownership dispute with the Evergreen County Recorder's Office, attaching a letter of intent to pursue civil and criminal legal action. Olivia contacted the State Attorney General's office with preliminary evidence of document forgery and corruption. We were just getting started. We didn't have all the answers yet, but we had the truth. And truth, in the hands of the right people, is a damn good weapon. Especially when you know the law better than your enemies. Especially when you wrote it. By the time our complaint hit the county recorder's inbox, the Whispering Pines HOA had already sensed trouble. Within 48 hours, I received a thick envelope delivered by courier to the ranch house. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter, 5 pages of legal threats, citations, and accusations. They claimed I was harassing their residents, endangering public peace, and unlawfully interfering with a legally recognized homeowners association. The letter was signed by Eleanor Quinn, president of the Whispering Pines HOA and CEO of Blackridge Holdings. She wasn't hiding anymore, and her message was clear: back off, or we'll bury you in paperwork and lawsuits. The next morning, my driveway was blocked. 3 massive pine trees had been cut down overnight, deliberately felled to form a barricade across my only vehicle-accessible route into town. Chainsaw marks were fresh. I found boot prints in the mud and tire tracks that led straight to the HOA's maintenance road. No one claimed responsibility, of course. When I called the sheriff's department, they sent a deputy who took some photos and made vague notes. But I could tell he wasn't eager to pick a fight with Whispering Pines. Not without explicit orders from Sheriff Wilkins. Later that day, I drove into town using the back trail, a winding, treacherous ATV path my father had carved years ago during a particularly brutal winter. It hadn't been used in over a decade, but that day it became my lifeline. I stopped at the feed store, bought coffee at the corner diner, and waited. And sure enough, people noticed. A few locals greeted me with cautious nods. Some avoided eye contact altogether. The story was spreading, and I wasn't the hero. I was the outsider, the angry landowner, the man threatening the peaceful new community in the hills. Eleanor's PR machine had fired its opening salvo. That night, we found their weapon of choice, a local blog post titled, "Man Claims Land from Families After 20 Years Away. Is Whispering Pines Under Siege?" It was clearly written by someone working for the HOA, or worse, someone being paid by them. It described me as a former federal bureaucrat from D.C., accused me of trying to displace families who bought their homes in good faith, and suggested I was leveraging obscure legal loopholes to steal back land that had been legally acquired through public processes. Olivia was furious. They're painting you as a villain, and they're doing it fast. They're controlling the narrative, and I said, we need to take that away from them. We built a website that same night, westbrookranchtruth.org. It told our story from the beginning, published copies of the suspicious easement documents, highlighted my grandfather's death certificate, and included satellite photos showing the construction timeline on my land. Olivia recorded a short video interview with me. Simple, honest, no editing tricks. We weren't just fighting in court anymore. We were fighting in public. While I handled the local noise, Olivia kept digging. She focused on Councilman Redfield, the man who had pushed through the development approvals. She discovered something interesting. A shell company called Hollow Creek Investments, registered under a P.O. box in another county, had been quietly acquiring parcels of land adjacent to Whispering Pines. Hollow Creek had the same accountant as Black Ridge Holdings and Redfield. He had received multiple campaign donations from both entities in the last 2 years, always just below the legal reporting threshold. It was a web, one we could trace, one we could unravel, but we needed a witness. That's when Olivia had a brilliant idea. Surveyors, she said, the people who marked the land boundaries, someone had to file those forged plats. If we can find the one who drew them, someone on the inside who got cold feet, we might have a way in. His name was Frank Delgado, a licensed land surveyor with a spotless reputation, until 2 years ago, when he started taking freelance contracts from developers. We tracked him down to a small office above a tax prep firm on the edge of town. When I walked in, he looked up from his desk and froze. "Mr. Westbrook," he said, "I didn't expect—" "Just a few questions," I interrupted. "Off the record." Frank tried to deny everything at first. But Olivia had come prepared, with records of his name on the forged easement filings, time-stamped GPS logs from the county site, and copies of 3 other surveys he had signed off on, all linked to Whispering Pines. When she mentioned federal fraud statutes and offered him a seat at the right end of the prosecution table, he cracked. "I didn't know it was your land," he muttered, visibly sweating. "They told me it was a formality. They said the documents had already been approved by the family, that you weren't interested anymore." "They paid you?" I asked. He nodded. "Cash, in an envelope, twice. The rest was under a consulting contract from Hollow Creek." Olivia leaned forward. "We need you, Frank, not just for testimony, for the whole playbook. Show us how they did this, and who else is involved." He hesitated, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a black notebook. "Everything's in here," he whispered. "Every coordinate, every call, every mistake." Back at the ranch, we laid out Frank's notes like evidence in a trial. He had detailed how Eleanor's team had bribed low-level clerks, faked boundary disputes, and created layers of legal obfuscation to hide the fraud. It was airtight, and it was just the beginning. We drafted a 37-page affidavit and submitted it to the state attorney general's office, formally requesting an investigation into forgery of legal documents, fraudulent use of public records, illegal land development under false pretense, public corruption and campaign finance violations. Then we sent the same file to every news outlet within a 3-county radius. We didn't ask them to take sides. We just gave them the story and let the truth speak for itself. That night, I returned to the Overlook Ridge. The lights of Whispering Pines were still glowing. But this time, I didn't feel anger or loss. I felt momentum. They wanted me gone. They wanted me intimidated. But what they really did was wake up the wrong man. It started with a voicemail. "Mr. Westbrook," the voice said, low and urgent. "My name is Carol Anderson. I think something similar happened to us." She gave no details, just an address. Then she hung up. I stared at my phone. We were no longer alone. Carol Anderson lived 2 counties over, a modest home, weathered porch, and a framed wedding photo that hadn't moved from the wall in 50 years. Her husband, John, had passed just months after they lost their family farm. "Eleanor Quinn made us an offer," she told me. "Said the land was unusable, said permits would never go through, said we'd face legal challenges for years unless we sold." Carol's voice trembled, but her eyes held firm. "When we refused, we got hit with zoning violations, water code citations, even an environmental inspection claiming our septic system was endangering a creek 2 miles away. Within 6 months, they sold. 3 months after that, the violations mysteriously disappeared, and luxury condos appeared where their barn used to stand. It was the same pattern: isolate, intimidate, acquire. But hearing it from Carol made it real. Eleanor hadn't just stolen my land. She had a system and a list of victims, and we were about to blow it wide open. With Carol's sworn affidavit and Frank Delgado's notebook, Olivia compiled a federal-level case file. She sent it to a contact at the DOJ, someone I'd worked with during the drafting of the Land Access Act. The reply came in less than 24 hours. We're opening a preliminary investigation. Your evidence is strong. Keep gathering. It wasn't a green light yet, but it was close. In the meantime, our website had gone viral. Local news had picked it up, followed by state media. I did my first live interview on the courthouse steps, standing next to Carol. The people of Whispering Pines deserve to know the truth, I said, looking straight into the camera. This isn't about development. It's about deception. It's about fraud. And it ends now. By nightfall, my inbox was flooded with more messages. My parents were pressured to sell under false pretenses. We were told the zoning was unsafe. Then they built a shopping plaza. She threatened to sue us into bankruptcy if we didn't sell. Names, dates, locations, proof. Olivia created a secure database and began sorting everything by region and timeline. And the name Eleanor Quinn appeared again and again. She didn't stay silent for long. 3 days after the media frenzy, Whispering Pines held an emergency town hall meeting at their community clubhouse. Residents, journalists, and more than a few curious neighbors showed up. And Eleanor, she was flawless. In a pearl gray suit and heels that never touched a drop of mud, she stood at the podium and smiled. "Mr. Westbrook is understandably confused," she said sweetly. "After so many years away, he's unaware of the progress this community has made. But let me be clear, all our documents are legal. All our development is approved, and Whispering Pines is here to stay." She passed out copies of the same forged documents, smiling, calm, lying. When one reporter asked about Frank Delgado, she deflected. When another mentioned the DOJ inquiry, she scoffed. "Bureaucrats love drama," she said with a laugh. "But the law's on our side." She turned to the crowd. "Don't let a disgruntled landowner scare you. Whispering Pines is your home." The crowd clapped, but a few didn't, and I was watching them. The next morning, Olivia got a burner text from a number we didn't recognize. "Meet me at the Overlook Trailhead, 11 p.m. Come alone." So I went. A figure stepped out of the shadows. A woman, mid-40s, jeans, windbreaker, face partially obscured. She handed me a flash drive. "I'm on the HOA board," she whispered. "Not everyone's a monster. That flash drive has the minutes of our closed meetings, including the one where Eleanor admitted the surveys were backdated." "Why are you helping us?" I asked. She hesitated. "Because I bought a cabin here. I believed in her. Now I realize I bought a lie. So did everyone else." Then she disappeared into the trees. The flash drive was gold. Recordings, notes, even scanned emails. One in particular stood out. "We need to move the northeast boundary line 120 farners. Frank will handle it. No one checks these things. Eleanor Quinn." Another, "Councilman Redfield has agreed to fast-track Phase 2. Wire the remaining payment to Hollow Creek under the standard LLC chain." And the best one? An audio recording. Eleanor laughing. "People think the law is about fairness. It's about who gets to use it first." Olivia compiled everything into a master file. 172 pages of evidence, exhibits, and sworn testimony. We delivered it in person to the Attorney General's office in the Capitol. This time, the response wasn't a maybe, it was a warrant. Within a week, subpoenas were flying. Redfield was placed under ethics investigation. Hollow Creek's records were seized, and a grand jury was quietly convened. Whispering Pines HOA's tone shifted overnight. They stopped returning media calls. The clubhouse shuttered for maintenance. And Eleanor? She disappeared from public view entirely. "Max," Olivia said as we sat on the porch one evening, "we have them cornered, but there's one last move." She laid out the plan. 1. Civil suit to reclaim ownership, damages, and demolition orders for every illegal structure. 2. Criminal referrals based on federal fraud, document forgery, conspiracy, and land theft. 3. Public campaign, not just to protect Whispering Pines residents, but to warn others. This isn't just about you anymore, she said. I looked out at the land. The wind rustled the grass. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes howled. No, I replied. It's about everyone they thought they could silence. That night, a message arrived. A printed letter slipped under the door. Back off or this gets ugly. Some land isn't worth the blood. No signature. But I knew who sent it, and they had just made their final mistake. The courtroom was packed. Locals filled every bench. Journalists lined the back wall. Even a few Whispering Pines residents, their expressions wary, had shown up. At the front, Eleanor Quinn sat like a queen at the gallows. Impeccably dressed, sunglasses perched on her head, not a hair out of place. Her legal team, 4 attorneys from a major firm in the state capital. On our side, me, Olivia, and a single document box packed tighter than a munitions crate. No suits, no theatrics. Just the truth. The judge entered, and the bailiff called the hearing to order. Eleanor's lead attorney went first. Your Honor, he said smoothly, my client is the victim of an opportunistic vendetta. Mr. Westbrook, having returned after a long absence, discovered our thriving community and now seeks to dismantle it under the guise of legal technicality. He cited county approvals, claimed good faith investment, repeated the phrase legally filed easements no less than 7 times. Then he dropped the big one. We asked the court to recognize Whispering Pines as a vested community. To strip it now would be cruel and unconstitutional. The judge nodded slowly, then he turned to me. Mr. Westbrook, your response? I stood. My name is Max Westbrook. I'm a former counsel to the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Land Access. I helped write the Federal Land Access and Conservation Act, the very law they're misusing to justify this theft. That got murmurs. Even the court reporter looked up. I know exactly how easements work. I wrote the limitations that prevent them from being turned into development licenses. What Whispering Pines did wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. I handed the judge a binder, in Exhibit A through J. Forged signatures, falsified surveys, fraudulent zoning approvals, all tied to Eleanor Quinn and her affiliates. The people who built on my land didn't just break the law, they re-engineered it, then sold the blueprints. Next came Frank Delgado, the nervous surveyor turned whistleblower. He described everything. The fake boundary changes, the orders to alter markers, the bribes. They told me no one would ever check, he said, hands shaking. They said it was just paperwork. Then Carol Anderson, tearful but composed. They told us we had to sell. Then they built condos and doubled the price. We lost our land. My husband never recovered. And finally, the HOA board mole. She played the audio recording. Eleanor's voice filled the room. The law's just a tool, and people like Max think it's a shield. But I've always preferred hammers. Dead silence. Then the judge leaned back in his chair. I've heard enough. It took him less than an hour. The court declared the easement invalid, the development illegal. Ownership of the land was fully restored to me, with damages awarded for lost use, environmental harm, and defamation. But there was more. Pending criminal investigations, state and federal, against Eleanor Quinn, Councilman Redfield, and several county employees. Warrants were issued, bank accounts frozen. As deputies moved toward her, Eleanor stood up, icy and smug. This isn't over, she snapped. You think you've won? These people need homes. I gave them paradise. You're taking it away. I didn't respond, but Olivia did. No, she said. You took their money, their peace, and their trust. We're giving it back. Here's the thing. I could have had it all torn down. The court gave me that right, but I didn't. Instead, I called a community meeting, this time in the old barn on the edge of my property. I stood in front of the Whispering Pines residents, many of them victims in their own way, and told them the truth. You were lied to. You were sold something built on fraud. But I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to offer a way forward. Together, we formed a land trust. Every buyer who'd purchased in good faith was offered a new lease, one that respected the land, the law, and the community. We rewrote the HOA charter from scratch, This time, transparent, democratic, and without Eleanor's iron grip. Whispering Pines became a real neighborhood. Not a con, not a scandal, but a second chance. It's been a year since the verdict. Eleanor is serving a 15-year sentence for fraud, forgery, and racketeering. Redfield pled guilty in exchange for testimony. The land is healing. The creek runs clear again. The hayfields are green. And on the ridge where the cabins once blocked the sunset, we built a community garden. Kids play there now, the kind of thing my father would have loved. Some nights I sit on the porch, coffee in hand, and watch the lights twinkle from the new Whispering Pines. It's no longer a monument to theft, it's a lesson. The law doesn't protect the loudest voice, it protects the truth. And sometimes it just takes the right person to remind everyone how powerful that truth can be. Karen thought she won, but then I dropped the lawsuit of the decade. She lost the land, the power, and eventually her freedom. And that's what happens when you weaponize an HOA against the wrong person. If you've got a nightmare neighbor or an HOA horror story, send it to us. This is HOA Karen Files, where justice isn't just served, it's notarized, filed, and enforced. Subscribe, share, and stay tuned, because next time, it might be your HOA that gets exposed.